It was a regular Wednesday morning when the first anomaly came through. The kind of morning that felt like every other one before it, dull, routine, until suddenly, everything changed. The usual hum of SpaceX's command center was punctuated by the soft but unmistakable beep that everyone dreaded. A beep that no one, not even the most seasoned engineers, had anticipated. It was the kind of sound that makes your heart skip a beat, sending a ripple of anxiety through your body. "Something's wrong," whispered Maya, one of the mission specialists, her fingers freezing over the keyboard. The room went dead silent, and all eyes turned toward her. She was staring at the massive screen in front of her, which now displayed an unusual, irregular pattern, a sequence of signals that made no sense. Elon Musk sat at the far end of the room, surrounded by his closest team of engineers, scientists, and astronauts. He was used to groundbreaking moments in the space industry, but this was different. His usually calm demeanor shifted, just for a second, as he leaned forward. "What's that?" he asked, his voice low but laced with a sense of urgency. Maya hesitated for a moment. "It's a signal, sir. From Mars." A murmur rippled through the room. Mars. The place they had spent years working toward, but for all its mystery, it was supposed to be barren, an empty red wasteland in the middle of nowhere. A place where no one expected to hear anything, let alone something that could change everything. Elon's fingers tapped nervously against the table, his mind racing. A signal from Mars? What does it say? The team scrambled to analyze the transmission, their eyes darting across screens, decoding the incomprehensible data. It was nothing like anything they'd seen before. It wasn't static or interference. It was purposeful, deliberate. "We're getting a pattern. It's structured," said Zane, the lead engineer, his voice rising with excitement and disbelief. "This isn't just random noise. This is communication." The tension in the room escalated. No one knew who or what could be sending this. The Mars mission had only launched a year earlier, and all communications from Mars had been carefully monitored and tested, but nothing like this had ever come up. "We need to analyze it fully," Elon said, his voice cutting through the panic in the room. "This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." He knew the implications. If this was truly a signal, it could be evidence of intelligent life, or worse, evidence that Mars had once harbored a civilization far more advanced than humanity's. Zane ran through the data quickly, trying to make sense of the numbers flashing on his screen. It was complex, more sophisticated than anything humans had developed. The kind of communication that suggested something ancient. Could it be a relic? Maya asked, her voice quivering slightly as she processed the data. Elon rubbed his chin. "It's possible. But if this is what I think it is, we need to be prepared for what comes next." The signal seemed to grow stronger with every passing second, almost as if it were alive, evolving right in front of them. It was like it had been waiting for someone to hear it, to notice it. And now they had. The room went quiet again, but this time the silence was different. This wasn't the typical dead air that followed a challenging problem, it was the kind of silence that settles when the truth is just out of reach, teasing them with something they couldn't quite grasp yet. "Prepare the team. We're going to Mars," Elon finally ordered. The command was simple, but his words carried a weight that settled over everyone in the room. They all knew the stakes. A mission to Mars had always been difficult, but this was different. This was unprecedented. The signal had to be investigated. And yet, as excited as they were, a new wave of dread swept through the group. A signal from Mars, this could open a door to discoveries that none of them were ready for. What if this is the beginning of something we don't understand? Elon thought, almost whispering to himself. He glanced around the room at his team, seeing the mix of awe and fear in their eyes. This wasn't just about exploring a planet anymore. This was about uncovering a mystery that could change the course of history, one that was buried for millennia in the red sands of Mars. Elon turned back to the screen, his mind whirling. He could already feel the weight of the discovery pressing down on him. This was his life's work, the culmination of decades of thinking, planning, and dreaming. But now, this was something far bigger than any of them had imagined. The room buzzed with energy as people began to prepare for the next steps. The team needed to analyze the signal in depth, confirm its origins, and devise a plan to investigate further. Elon's mind, however, was already on the next phase, getting the astronauts back into space, back to Mars. But who else is out there? The thought hovered in the back of his mind. And what exactly are we getting into? Before he could dwell too much on the possibility of extraterrestrial life, one of the engineers spoke up again, their voice breaking through the tension. "Sir, we're going to need more than just one ship. This is bigger than we thought. We'll need to send a team of specialists to decode this fully." Elon nodded. "I'll authorize whatever we need. We need to find out who sent this, and why." The rest of the team immediately began planning their next steps, setting up communications with NASA, preparing for the possibility of sending an expedition to Mars far sooner than they had originally intended. But in the back of Elon's mind, the question kept growing louder. What if this signal was a warning? As the team worked into the night, Elon stood by the massive windows of the SpaceX headquarters, looking out over the lights of the city below. In that moment, he couldn't help but feel like they were standing on the edge of something monumental. Something far greater than just the future of SpaceX. For a brief moment, everything felt surreal. The world had just stepped into the unknown. He smiled, but there was no joy in it, just a quiet recognition of what this moment truly meant. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, he thought to himself as if trying to reach out to the millions of people who would eventually be captivated by this story. This was the beginning of a new chapter. The world was about to learn something that would leave them speechless. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The discovery of the signal had already consumed Elon Musk's thoughts, but as the team worked to analyze it, he found himself wandering down a different path, one that led back to his early days, to a time when he was just a boy dreaming of the stars. Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of his coffee mug as he gazed out the window. The vast emptiness of space seemed to echo inside him, a reminder of all the unanswered questions that had driven him since he was a child. But beyond the mission to Mars, beyond the ambition of reaching new frontiers, there was something more personal that had always spurred him forward, the haunting memory of a conversation he had with his father decades ago. It was in the mid-1980s, long before Tesla, SpaceX, or the dream of interplanetary travel. A young Elon, barely 10 years old, sat at a kitchen table in Pretoria, South Africa, across from his father, Elon Musk. His father, a mechanical engineer, had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was with a kind of cold wisdom that struck at the heart of anyone who listened. "Elon, you know that the world doesn't care about your dreams," Errol had said one evening, his voice clipped and emotionless. "You have to learn that the world will break you down if you're not strong enough to handle it. People will tell you that you can't do things. But you'll have to prove them wrong, over and over again. If you don't, the world will chew you up and spit you out." Elon remembered how the words had stung, how they made him feel smaller than he already was. But over time, they became the fire that fueled his ambitions. He thought back to the countless nights in his youth when he would stay up late, reading books on space exploration, dreaming of what lay beyond the stars. He would often sneak into his father's garage to work on small mechanical projects, teaching himself how things worked, how to build, and how to fail forward. Every mistake, every broken tool, only made him more determined. There were times when the loneliness was unbearable, but it didn't matter. The stars were calling him. Years later, Elon left South Africa for Canada and then to the United States, chasing the bigger dreams of Silicon Valley. But it wasn't just the promise of technology that drew him, it was the same urge that had pushed him as a child, an urge to escape the limits of the Earth and reach for something beyond. Space had always been his ultimate goal, but he had learned the hard way that ambition alone wouldn't get him there. His rise to success had been anything but easy. He had been ridiculed, underestimated, and often outright ignored. He had to fight for his place in the tech world, to prove that his ideas weren't just dreams, but the future. But it wasn't just the world around him that had been difficult to navigate, it was the internal struggle, too. The pressure to live up to the impossible expectations he set for himself, the constant struggle with self-doubt. It all weighed heavily on him. As the years passed, Elon built his empire, from PayPal to Tesla and finally to SpaceX. But the journey was long, filled with failures, setbacks, and moments of almost insurmountable loss. People thought he was crazy for pouring his money into SpaceX, for wanting to colonize Mars. But Elon knew better than anyone else that the road to greatness was never straight. It was filled with twists, turns, and obstacles that only the brave, or the stubborn, could overcome. He thought back to the early days of SpaceX when he nearly ran out of money after 3 failed rocket launches. There were times when the whole team had doubted the mission, when even the brightest minds in the room feared it was over. And yet, here they were, on the verge of something far greater than he ever could have imagined. But this new discovery, the signal from Mars, had thrown him off balance. It was too big. Too important. It felt like the universe was testing him. He stood up from his desk, running a hand through his hair as he walked toward the window again. The team was busy analyzing the signal, and soon they would need his decision on the next steps. But Elon needed a moment to gather himself, to connect the dots between his past and this monumental moment. He thought about how it all came together, the late nights, the setbacks, the impossibilities, and the relentless desire to change the world. And now, this signal from Mars, this discovery that could very well rewrite the history of humanity. Was this what he had been working toward all along? But the truth was, he wasn't sure. For as much as he had dreamed of making history, this felt different. The idea of finding signs of intelligent life on Mars, of possibly encountering a civilization far more advanced than humanity, carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Elon's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. A message from Maya popped up on the screen. It read, "We've deciphered part of the transmission. It's like nothing we've ever seen. You need to see this." Without another thought, Elon grabbed his jacket and headed toward the control room. He had no time for doubts or reflection now. The future was waiting, and it had just taken a turn he hadn't been prepared for. He entered the room, where the team was already gathered around a screen. Maya was the first to meet his gaze, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "Sir, you need to see this," she said, stepping aside so Elon could take a closer look at the transmission. The screen displayed a series of complex, seemingly random symbols. But as Elon studied them, the patterns began to emerge. Each symbol was precise, carefully crafted. It wasn't just a random jumble of characters, it was a message. Maya pointed to one section of the transmission. "We think it's a warning, but we're not sure yet. It mentions something about an ancient catastrophe." Elon's heart skipped a beat. A warning? What kind of warning? This could be it, he whispered, his mind racing. A warning from the past, from a civilization long gone, buried on a planet he had spent his entire career trying to conquer. Mars was no longer just a dream, it was a call to action. And whatever lay ahead, he knew this was no ordinary discovery. This wasn't just about space exploration anymore. It was about understanding the past, uncovering a secret that could change everything. As the team worked to decode the rest of the transmission, Elon's thoughts raced back to that conversation with his father. The words that had shaped him, that had driven him to this point, echoed in his mind, "If you don't, the world will chew you up and spit you out." He had made it this far, against all odds. But this was something entirely different. And this time, he couldn't do it alone. The team worked through the night, their exhaustion evident, but none of them dared to take a break. The signal from Mars had become an obsession, an enigma they were determined to solve. Maya was the first to crack a part of the code. She leaned forward, her fingers dancing rapidly across the keyboard, as the transmission data updated on the screen. "Elon, you need to see this," Maya called out. She had always been the quiet one on the team, focused and precise, but there was a rare edge in her voice now, a mix of excitement and something else. Maybe fear. Elon walked over quickly, his mind already racing with possibilities. Could this be it? Was this the breakthrough they'd been waiting for? He stood behind Maya as she clicked through the data, her face lit by the glow of the screen. "It's a sequence," she said, pointing to a series of symbols. "But look here." Elon leaned in closer. The screen displayed rows of geometric shapes and lines that seemed to loop in on themselves, like a puzzle that was just beginning to fall into place. "These aren't just random patterns," Maya continued. "They're mathematical in nature. They're coordinates. Coordinates that could lead to something on Mars." Elon's heart rate quickened. Coordinates on Mars? What could be hidden on the red planet that required such a deliberate message? The magnitude of this discovery was beginning to sink in. "Is it a location?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Yes," Maya confirmed. "These coordinates, they point to a specific place on Mars. And from what I can tell, it's an area that's been completely untouched by human exploration. It's far beyond the reach of any rover or satellite scans we've done so far." The silence in the room was thick, punctuated only by the soft clicking of keyboards and the hum of computers working overtime. Elon stood motionless for a moment, his mind racing. A place untouched by humans. That could only mean one thing: whatever was there, it had remained hidden for eons. But why? And why send a signal now, when humanity was on the cusp of establishing a presence on Mars? "This is big," Elon finally said, his voice quiet but intense. "We need to verify these coordinates. And we need to send a team, immediately." The room erupted into a flurry of activity. Engineers, data analysts, and mission planners scrambled to pull up more information, cross-reference the coordinates with satellite imagery, and figure out how to send a team to this mysterious location on Mars. "How soon can we send someone?" Zane, the lead engineer, asked, glancing up from his console. His face was pale, his eyes tired from the hours of constant work, but there was a fire in them now. The excitement was palpable. Elon's mind was already working ahead. "We need to get the next mission scheduled as soon as possible. If this is what I think it is, we can't waste any time." But Maya's voice cut through the tension. "There's one more thing," she said, her fingers hovering over the keys. "The transmission, it doesn't just mention coordinates. It also talks about a guardian." "A guardian?" Elon repeated, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" Maya hesitated for a moment, as if she wasn't sure whether to share the information. But then she continued, her voice low. "It's a reference to something, or someone. A protector of the secret hidden in these coordinates. Something that the message implies will reveal itself when the time is right." Elon's stomach churned. A guardian? It sounded almost like a warning, like there was something, or someone, on Mars, waiting for them. "Are you saying we might not be alone on Mars?" Zane asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Maya didn't answer immediately. She simply stared at the screen, her face pale, her fingers trembling as she typed in the remaining data. "We can't know for sure," she said finally. "But it doesn't sound like a simple discovery. This is something more. Something that's been waiting for humanity to uncover it." Elon felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had built SpaceX with the goal of making life multiplanetary, to give humanity the chance to escape the confines of Earth. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about space exploration. This was about discovering something far bigger, something beyond their understanding. And there was no turning back. He turned to his team, his face hardening with determination. Prepare the next crew. We're going to Mars. But we need to be cautious. We don't know what's waiting for us there. The team nodded, their faces a mix of excitement and fear. They all knew the risks. Mars was unforgiving. The unknowns, the dangers, they could be anywhere. But this was it. This was the moment that would define their careers, their lives, and possibly humanity's future. Elon paced back and forth, his mind spinning with 1,000 questions. What was the Guardian? Was it a natural phenomenon, or was there something, or someone, on Mars that humanity wasn't prepared to face? The implications were terrifying, and yet, they had no choice. They had to go. As the team began preparations for the next mission, Elon found himself alone in the command center, staring at the data on the screen. The coordinates. The Guardian. The mysterious transmission. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Mars, a planet that had always seemed so distant, so sterile, was suddenly alive with secrets. The mystery was calling to them, and Elon knew, with a clarity that left him breathless, that they had to uncover it. Whatever it was, they were ready. Or at least, they had to be. Elon stood up from his desk, grabbing his jacket and walking out of the room with purpose. As he stepped into the hallway, he could hear the buzz of activity around him. People were preparing. They were ready to go. But what would they find when they got there? And what was waiting for them in the shadows of Mars? The hours between the discovery of the transmission and the decision to send a team to Mars had felt like days. Elon could hardly focus, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the cryptic coordinates and the mention of a Guardian that had been buried in the transmission. He couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Who, or what, could be protecting a secret on Mars? Why had it been hidden for so long? But now, there was no time for contemplation. The plan was set into motion, and SpaceX's next crewed mission was being fast-tracked. Preparations were happening at breakneck speed, and Elon was at the center of it all, making sure every detail was accounted for. As the shuttle team began assembling, the reality of the situation hit. This wasn't just another step toward colonizing Mars. This was something entirely new, a search for answers that could change the course of history. It was still dark outside and Elon stood in the launch facility, overlooking the massive Falcon Heavy rocket that would carry the crew into space. He could feel the pulse of the machines around him, the energy of the launch bay buzzing in the cold air. The shuttle's engines were being tested one final time, the team ensuring that everything was ready for the most important mission they had ever embarked on. Maya was by his side, scanning over her tablet, checking the coordinates again. Everything's lining up perfectly, she said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of apprehension in her eyes. We've got the exact location. Mars Base 7. The coordinates match. Elon nodded absently, still caught up in his thoughts. It had all come down to this. For years, Mars had been a symbol of humanity's future, a new home for the human race. But now, it was more than that. Mars was a puzzle. And the pieces were beginning to fit together in ways they couldn't have predicted. We're really doing this, Maya added, almost to herself. We're sending people to uncover a secret no one's ever known about. Elon turned to her, his eyes sharp. We don't have a choice, Maya. This could be our future. Or it could be something far more important than we can even imagine. The countdown had already begun, and the crew was preparing to board. Elon walked down the hallway to the crew's staging area, his heart pounding in his chest. The crew of 6, all carefully selected for this mission, were waiting, going through their final checks. As he entered the room, they all turned their heads toward him. Their faces were a mixture of anticipation, nerves, and excitement, just as he'd expected. He nodded to each of them, making eye contact as they finished securing their suits. They were ready. But this wasn't just about exploring new frontiers, this was about unraveling a mystery that could change the very fabric of humanity's understanding of the universe. Elon, one of the astronauts, Commander Jace Carter, spoke up as he adjusted his helmet. "Are we expecting any trouble? You're not giving us much to go on here." Elon swallowed, feeling the weight of the question. "What we're about to face is unknown. But we're going to do this together, and we'll stick to the plan. We trust each other, and that's what will get us through." Jace nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, sir." Elon felt a pang of doubt, but he pushed it aside. They didn't have time for hesitation. Not now. The rocket stood tall in the dimly lit hangar, its engines ready to roar to life, its payload set to carry the crew on the most dangerous journey of their lives. There was no room for second-guessing. Mars was calling, and the answer would be made on their terms. The Falcon Heavy launched into the sky, shaking the ground as its engines burned bright, sending a trail of fire into the heavens. The astronauts aboard felt the immense pressure of the acceleration, but the noise and shaking of the rocket couldn't suppress the exhilaration in the air. They were on their way to Mars, on a mission no one had ever embarked upon before. Elon watched from the control room, the video feed showing the rocket climbing higher and higher. He felt a strange combination of pride and anxiety. This wasn't just another step forward, it was a leap into the unknown. "We're on course," Maya's voice came through his earpiece, a note of relief in her tone. "Everything's going smoothly." Elon remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the screen. He wanted to believe that everything would be fine, that they would reach Mars safely, explore the coordinates, and uncover the mystery buried on the red planet. But he knew better than anyone that space had a way of throwing curveballs. There were risks at every turn, and they had no idea what they were really walking into. After several days of travel, the crew finally arrived at Mars. The planet loomed large and silent in the distance, the reddish landscape stretching as far as the eye could see. The shuttle maneuvered into orbit, circling the planet before preparing for the descent. The coordinates led them to a remote part of the planet, far from the settled colonies and familiar landmarks. It was a place untouched by human presence, as the transmission had predicted. Elon stood before a giant monitor, watching the shuttle's descent with a mix of awe and tension. The cameras on the shuttle had captured the barren landscape, vast and inhospitable, but there was something else, something in the distance that didn't quite belong. A structure. Is that it? Maya's voice crackled through the comms. "Is that what we're looking for?" Elon squinted at the screen. In the distance, barely visible against the dusty horizon, was a shape, a structure that stood out against the natural terrain, stark and imposing. "It has to be," he said, his heart racing. "Prepare for landing. We're going to investigate." The shuttle's engines roared as they touched down, sending plumes of red dust swirling into the thin Martian atmosphere. The crew quickly disembarked, their boots crunching on the cold, dusty ground. The air was thin, their breaths coming in short bursts through their helmets. The structure loomed ahead, its design unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a towering formation, geometric, precise, as though it had been built by intelligent hands. But there were no markings, no signs of life, just silence. "Let's move in," Jace commanded, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in the air. They walked toward the structure, their footsteps muffled by the dust. Elon could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. This was it. This was the point of no return. Whatever they found beyond those walls would either confirm or destroy everything they thought they knew about Mars. As they reached the entrance, Elon hesitated. The air around them was deathly still, the only sound the faint hum of their life support systems. There was a chill in the air, a sense of unease. "Are you ready for this?" Maya asked, her voice almost a whisper. Elon nodded, his eyes fixed on the opening ahead. "There's no turning back." With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his foot crossing the threshold into the unknown. The entrance to the structure was unlike anything the crew had ever seen. The massive stone door stood silent, as if waiting for them, covered in strange markings that defied explanation. The air felt thicker now, as though the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Elon's heart pounded as he took the first step into the darkened interior, the faint echo of his boots the only sound in the eerie silence. Maya followed closely behind, her hand resting on her helmet as she gazed at the mysterious symbols etched into the walls. "These symbols, they don't match anything in our database," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "They're not from any civilization we know." Elon motioned for the team to continue forward, his mind racing with possibilities. They were standing inside a structure that no human had ever set foot in before. The enormity of it was both exhilarating and terrifying. The further they walked, the more the air grew dense. The structure seemed to pulse, almost alive, as though it had been waiting for them. The walls narrowed, guiding them down a dimly lit corridor that felt as if it were closing in. Elon's breath caught in his throat. There was something here, something undeniable and powerful. "Are you getting this?" Jace whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and excitement. "I am," Maya responded, her hand gripping her tablet tightly. "There's something in here, something that shouldn't exist." Ahead, the corridor opened into a massive chamber, its vastness nearly impossible to comprehend. The walls stretched higher than they could see, and the ceiling disappeared into shadow. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a device unlike anything the crew had ever encountered. It was a perfect sphere, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light, its surface covered in intricate designs that seemed to move when they weren't looking directly at them. "This is it," Elon whispered, stepping forward. "This is the secret." But even as he spoke, a sudden chill washed over him. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as he surveyed the room. The silence felt oppressive, as though the walls themselves were watching him, waiting. Maya reached for the sphere, her fingers hovering above it. "What do you think this is?" "I don't know," Elon replied. "But we need to proceed carefully. This could be." Suddenly, the chamber's lights flared to life, and a deep, resonating hum filled the room. The sphere on the pedestal began to glow brighter, its light pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. A voice, low and otherworldly, echoed through the chamber, reverberating in their helmets. It was impossible to pinpoint where it was coming from, as if it were coming from everywhere at once. "Who dares disturb the Guardian?" Elon froze. His breath caught in his throat. The voice wasn't human, it was ancient, almost primal. The words felt like a command, not a question. Maya's voice trembled in his earpiece. "What is that?" "It's a warning," Elon said, though his voice was unsteady. "We need to back away. Now." But it was too late. The ground beneath them shook, and a low rumbling sound filled the air. The pedestal trembled, and the sphere began to rise, floating above its base. The room around them seemed to warp, the walls twisting and stretching as though the very fabric of reality was bending. "Elon, what's happening?" Jace demanded, his voice sharp with panic. "I don't know," Elon admitted, his heart racing. "Everyone, fall back to the entrance, now." The crew scrambled, but the ground continued to tremble, throwing them off balance. The walls seemed to pulse, pushing them back toward the entrance. Elon's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. He had never felt such an overwhelming sense of danger before. This was no longer just about exploration, it was about survival. The sphere above the pedestal crackled with energy, and a blinding light filled the room, forcing them all to shield their eyes. And then, in an instant, the light disappeared. When Elon opened his eyes again, the room was still. The pedestal had returned to its resting place, but the sphere was gone. The chamber was quiet once more, except for the soft hum that still lingered in the air. Maya was the first to speak, her voice filled with awe and fear. "What was that? What just happened?" I don't know, Elon replied, his throat dry. But whatever it was the Guardian. The realization hit them all at once. The Guardian wasn't a being in the traditional sense. It wasn't a creature or a person. It was a force, something built into the very fabric of the structure. Something that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for someone to awaken it. Elon's heart was still racing. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They had disturbed something ancient, something that had been watching over Mars for longer than humanity had existed. What was that voice? Jace asked, his eyes wide behind his helmet. It sounded like it knew we were coming. Elon paused, considering his words carefully. Maybe it did. Maya glanced down at her tablet, her eyes scanning over the data again. The transmission, it mentioned the Guardian. It said it would reveal itself when the time was right. Maybe that was the moment. Elon nodded, his mind still reeling. That's possible. But whatever it was, it's not over. We've only just begun to understand what's happening here. Jace stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Elon, we need to get out of here. Whatever we've just triggered, it's not going to stop. Elon turned to the rest of the crew. We'll leave. But we're not done. We'll come back with a larger team. We need to study this. As they made their way back toward the entrance, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Guardian had revealed itself, but only for a brief moment. And that moment had been enough to change everything. They reached the shuttle, but as the doors closed and they prepared for liftoff, Elon knew deep down that the real journey was just beginning. Mars had given them a glimpse of its secrets. But now, the questions were only multiplying. What had they really uncovered? And what else was hidden beneath the surface of the red planet? As the shuttle ascended from the Martian surface, Elon's eyes were fixed on the planet below. The mystery of Mars was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It was something much larger, and much more dangerous. The Guardian had awoken. And it was only a matter of time before they discovered its true purpose. The shuttle's ascent from Mars was swift, but Elon's mind remained grounded on the red planet. The chaotic events inside the mysterious structure replayed over and over in his mind, each image more vivid than the last. The voice of the Guardian, the sudden surge of energy, the overwhelming presence of something ancient and powerful, everything felt unreal. And yet, as the Martian surface grew smaller in the shuttle's rearview, Elon knew one thing for certain: they had only just begun to understand what they had unleashed. The crew was silent during the return journey. Each of them lost in their thoughts, processing the events that had just unfolded. The calm, sterile environment of the shuttle's interior only emphasized the chaos they had left behind on Mars. Maya, usually the most vocal of the crew, was the first to break the silence. Her voice crackled through Elon's earpiece. Elon, we're still trying to process what happened back there. What was that thing? What did we wake up? Elon exhaled slowly, adjusting his seat harness as he faced the bulkhead. I don't know, Maya. But I think whatever it is, it's been here a lot longer than we have. It could be something from an entirely different civilization, or it could be something that predates civilization altogether. Jace's voice followed, filled with skepticism. You really think it's that big, Elon? That it's something? Yes, Jace, Elon cut in. I do. The data we've gathered, the transmission that led us there, it's not just a coincidence. Mars has been hiding something, and we've just scratched the surface of it. There was a pause on the comms before Maya spoke again. But the Guardian said, "Who dares disturb the Guardian?" Why did it say that? It was like it knew we were coming. Does it know who we are? Or was it just responding to the presence of the shuttle? Could be either, Elon said thoughtfully. Maybe the technology here has been monitoring Mars for millennia. Or maybe it's just a warning. Either way, we were never meant to uncover this. Not yet. Jace's voice was filled with an edge now. So we just wake up a godlike force, and now we're supposed to leave it alone. Is that really your plan, Elon? Elon's eyes narrowed as he responded, his voice calm but firm. I'm not saying we leave it alone. I'm saying we need to approach this carefully. We don't fully understand what we're dealing with yet. We need to gather more information, more data. But if that thing, the Guardian, is something that's been watching over Mars for this long, we need to be sure it's safe to explore. We can't go in blind. Maya nodded in agreement, though there was still unease in her voice. I agree with you, Elon, but I'm also worried. The Guardian, it was protecting something. And I don't think it was just some artifact. There's more to it. Elon felt his pulse quicken. Maya's words hit home, resonating with him more than he cared to admit. The Guardian was more than just a force, it was a protector. And what was it protecting? As the shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere, Elon's thoughts shifted back to the immediate situation at hand. The team had to land and debrief, but there was something else that weighed heavily on his mind. The transmission had been clear. The coordinates were specific. And they led to one undeniable conclusion: Mars was hiding something, and it wasn't just ancient artifacts. It was something alive. Something that had been waiting for them. Hours later, as the team gathered in the debriefing room at SpaceX's headquarters, Elon found himself standing before a large display screen, the Martian landscape filling the background. The room was filled with hushed murmurs as the crew took their seats. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Elon to speak first, to provide answers. But the truth was, Elon didn't have any answers. Not yet. We've returned, Elon began, his voice steady but filled with a weight that none of them could ignore. We've seen things on Mars that we cannot fully comprehend. But we need to face the reality of the situation. We've awoken something ancient, something powerful. And now we have a choice. He paused, letting his words settle in the room. We can choose to turn back, to abandon the mission, to ignore the mystery we uncovered. Or we can choose to dive deeper. To go back to Mars, armed with more knowledge and resources, and continue to search for the truth behind the Guardian and the secrets of Mars. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke for a long while. It was Jace who finally broke the silence, his voice steady but filled with the same edge that had been in his tone on the shuttle. I say we go back, Jace said firmly. We came this far. If there's a real threat out there, then we need to know what it is. Ignoring it isn't an option. Maya nodded, her expression serious. I agree. But we have to be prepared for the unknown. The Guardian isn't just some ancient machine, it's a sentient force. It can't be controlled easily. Elon stood in front of the screen, his eyes scanning the faces of the team. This mission will not be easy. But I think we're ready for it. We have a responsibility now, not just to SpaceX, not just to Earth, but to the future of humanity. The Guardian, whatever it is not just guarding something on Mars. It's guarding knowledge. And that knowledge could change everything. Days passed as the crew prepared for their return journey to Mars. Elon stayed in his office, poring over the data from their initial expedition, combing through every detail. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something critical. The Guardian's cryptic message had resonated with him, echoing in his mind, who dares disturb the Guardian? It wasn't just a warning, it was a question. It was a challenge. And Elon knew that he couldn't resist it. The team would return to Mars. They would uncover more secrets, even if it meant facing dangers they couldn't predict. But Elon was more determined than ever. He had started this journey to make history, but now, with the Guardian revealed, it felt as though they were on the edge of something far more profound than space exploration. They were on the verge of unlocking the universe's deepest mysteries. As the shuttle preparations continued, Elon stood on the balcony of the SpaceX facility, gazing up at the stars. He thought of the future, humanity's future. He thought of Mars, not just as a new home, but as the key to something far greater. And then he thought of the Guardian. Something ancient. Something powerful. Something that had been waiting for them. And in that moment, Elon Musk knew that the true journey had only just begun. The countdown had begun. Elon stood in front of the control room, watching as the team prepared for their second mission to Mars. This time, the stakes were higher. The mysteries that lay beneath the Martian surface were no longer theoretical, they were real, and they were waiting to be uncovered. The Guardian, the sphere, the pulsing energy, they had all been part of something much larger. And now, Elon had a responsibility to uncover every last piece of the puzzle, no matter the cost. Maya, Jace, and the rest of the crew were busy finalizing their gear, preparing the shuttle for departure. There was a palpable sense of tension in the air. It wasn't fear, but something deeper, an unspoken understanding that they were stepping into unknown territory. No one knew exactly what to expect once they returned to Mars. They had barely survived their first encounter, and now they were going back for more. "We're ready," Maya said, stepping into the control room with a serious expression. "Everything is set for launch. We've got more equipment, more data, we'll be able to investigate the site thoroughly this time." Elon nodded but couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. "This is different. Last time, we were unprepared. We had no idea what we were walking into." Jace, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "We still don't know what we're walking into. But that's why we're going back. To find out what's really going on with Mars and the Guardian. This time, we'll be ready for anything." Elon's gaze drifted to the massive screen showing the countdown timer. The seconds ticked away, each one bringing them closer to Mars. He felt the weight of the decision he had made. This wasn't just about science or exploration anymore. This was about unlocking the secrets of an ancient force, something that had been hidden for eons. And they were about to find out why. The journey to Mars was long, but this time, it felt different. The crew was silent for most of the flight, each person lost in their thoughts. Elon spent his time going over the mission plans, running simulations in his mind, and strategizing the safest and most effective way to approach the Guardian's domain. They had learned from their previous encounter, but they also knew that the unknowns far outweighed the knowns. As they entered Mars' orbit, the familiar sight of the planet's rusty surface spread out before them. Elon could feel the tension rising within him, like a knot tightening in his chest. They were returning to the place where they had uncovered something extraordinary, something that had changed everything. And they were about to go deeper. The shuttle's descent was slow and controlled. Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as they neared the structure they had discovered. It loomed ahead of them, far more imposing than it had seemed from the air during their first encounter. It was massive, impossibly so. As the shuttle's landing gear touched the Martian surface, the reality of what they were facing settled in. "Touchdown," the pilot's voice rang out over the comms. "We're on the surface. Welcome back to Mars." "All right, team," Elon said, taking a deep breath and stepping toward the hatch. "We know what we're up against. Stay alert, and stick together. The Guardian is still out there, and we need to be cautious. But we're not leaving until we know what it's protecting. Understood?" "Understood," Maya responded, her voice steady despite the unease in her eyes. The crew filed out of the shuttle, the thin Martian atmosphere pressing down on them. The land around them was desolate, the reddish soil stretching as far as the eye could see. But just ahead, the dark silhouette of the structure stood tall, an enigmatic monument to something ancient and unknown. The faint glow of the energy they had witnessed during their first visit seemed to emanate from within, drawing them in once again. The team made their way to the entrance, their footsteps the only sound in the otherwise still Martian landscape. Elon's pulse quickened as they neared the massive stone door. The symbols from their first encounter were still carved into the surface, their meaning still elusive. But this time, they weren't just visitors, they were explorers, with a purpose. As they approached, the door began to hum, low and resonant. A soft blue light flickered along the edges, as if the structure recognized their presence. Elon's heart raced. The Guardian had been waiting. And now, they were ready to face it. Inside the structure, the air was thick with tension. The walls seemed to close in around them as they moved deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. The further they went, the more the faint glow of the sphere from before seemed to pulse with a rhythmic energy, as though the structure itself was alive. "This place," Maya whispered, "it's like a living entity. Everything is connected, almost like the walls themselves are, reacting to us." "Stay focused," Elon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not here to admire the architecture. We're here to find answers." They reached the chamber where they had first encountered the sphere. The pedestal was still there, but the sphere was gone. Instead, a strange energy filled the space, and the room seemed to hum with a power that could only be described as otherworldly. Jace stepped forward, his voice tense. "Something's different. This energy, it feels like it's gathering." Before anyone could respond, the walls began to shift again, groaning with the weight of some unseen force. The floor vibrated beneath their feet and a deep, guttural sound filled the room. Something was happening. And then, the Guardian spoke. "Who dares disturb me once more?" The voice echoed, resonating through their helmets and rattling their very bones. This time, it wasn't just a warning. It was a command. The force that had been dormant for millennia had awakened, and it was not pleased. Elon stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. "We've come to understand. We've come to learn what you protect." The Guardian's voice grew louder, almost deafening. "You are not ready. The secrets of Mars are not for you." The ground beneath them trembled once more, and the energy in the room surged, growing more intense. The walls pulsed with a vibrant light, and the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop suddenly, sending a chill through the crew. "Prepare yourselves," Elon said, his voice steady but urgent. "This is only the beginning." The situation had escalated quickly. The calm, measured approach that Elon had hoped for was slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of urgency and fear. The Guardian had made it clear that they weren't welcome, that they weren't ready for the knowledge it protected. But there was no turning back now. The conflict had begun, and the crew was about to face a trial far beyond anything they had imagined. The energy in the room continued to rise, and the walls around them began to glow with an ethereal light. The tension in the air was suffocating, and for the first time since they'd arrived on Mars, Elon wasn't sure what was going to happen next. One thing was clear, the stakes were higher than ever. The hum of the Guardian's voice reverberated through the chamber, shaking the walls around them. It was as if the very air itself was charged with an unexplainable force, pulsing in rhythm with the energy from the stone walls. Elon and the crew stood frozen, their hearts pounding in their chests. For a moment, the world outside the chamber seemed to disappear, leaving only the presence of the Guardian, an ancient entity more powerful than they had ever anticipated. "Prepare yourselves," the voice boomed again, more insistent this time, as the temperature in the room dropped even further. The walls shimmered with an eerie blue light that flickered like lightning, casting strange shadows around them. Elon took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had anticipated danger, but not like this. Not like the suffocating presence of something so powerful, so ancient. But now, they had come too far to back down. The quest for knowledge, for the truth behind the Guardian's existence, was bigger than anything they had ever imagined. It was a test, a challenge, and they were about to face it head-on. Maya stepped forward, her voice unwavering as she spoke to the force that filled the chamber. "We're not here to take anything. We're here to understand, to learn. We need to know why you're here and what you protect." The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, Elon wasn't sure if they would get a response. But then, the walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and the temperature began to rise again, as if the guardian was contemplating their words. You seek knowledge, the voice said, softer now, almost contemplative. But knowledge is not without its price. The secrets you seek are guarded by trials that only the worthy may pass. Elon's stomach twisted with a sense of dread. What kind of trials? He asked cautiously. The walls flickered, and suddenly, the room around them began to shift. The floor beneath their feet cracked, and stone pillars rose from the ground, each one topped with strange symbols that seemed to glow in response to the energy of the guardian. The walls seemed to recede, opening up into a vast, cavernous expanse that felt both alien and ancient. Only those who prove their worth may learn the truth of Mars, the voice declared. You will face the trials of intellect, courage, and sacrifice. Succeed, and the knowledge of this world will be yours. Fail, and you will be lost forever. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber, and suddenly, a massive stone door slammed shut behind them, trapping the crew inside. The atmosphere was thick with tension. The team looked at each other, uncertainty and fear beginning to creep in. This wasn't just an exploration anymore, it was a test of their very survival. We can't go back now, Elon said, his voice grim but resolute. We're in this together. Maya nodded, determination in her eyes. We've made it this far. We're not turning back. Jace clenched his fists. Let's do it. Whatever it takes. Without warning, the symbols on the stone pillars flared brighter, casting harsh shadows across the cavern. The first trial was beginning. The floor before them cracked open, revealing a massive chasm, stretching deep into the darkness below. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, and the temperature had plummeted again. Elon instinctively reached for the collar of his suit, adjusting it to maintain the pressure, but his eyes remained fixed on the vast drop before them. A voice boomed, filling the cavern with its reverberating presence. The first trial is one of intellect. To proceed, you must solve the puzzle of the ancients. Fail, and you will fall into the abyss below. Elon stared at the chasm, then at the glowing symbols on the pillars. They weren't just random designs, there was a pattern, an order. The symbols seemed to correspond to certain points in the room, each of them radiating an almost magnetic pull. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. Maya stepped forward, her brow furrowed. These symbols, they're not just carvings. They're a code. Each one seems to correspond to a different frequency. Elon nodded, impressed by her insight. That's it. We need to align the frequencies. It's like tuning a radio. Each symbol represents a key, and we need to find the right sequence to open the door. Jace looked over the puzzle, his eyes scanning the glowing symbols. But how do we know which sequence is right? If we get it wrong, the floor will drop out from beneath us, Maya finished for him. Her voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable tension behind her words. Elon moved toward the first pillar, his mind racing as he analyzed the sequence of symbols. We don't have much time. Let's work together. We have to trust our instincts on this. Maya and Jace quickly joined him, working in tandem. Each of them adjusted the symbols in sequence, trying to find the correct combination that would unlock the next stage. Sweat trickled down Elon's forehead as the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The air in the chamber grew colder with each failed attempt, and the eerie hum of the Guardian's voice echoed in their ears. The pressure was mounting. The abyss below seemed to grow darker, more menacing, with every failed attempt. But Elon wouldn't give up. He couldn't. They couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Finally, with a soft click, the symbols aligned. The room trembled, and the stone door began to rise, revealing the next stage of the journey. A faint light illuminated the cavern, and the team breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had passed the first trial. Intellect. The first trial is complete, the Guardian's voice intoned. You have proven your minds are sharp. But there are more challenges ahead. Elon looked around at his team, his heart pounding. They had barely survived the first test, but they had made it. One trial down, two more to go. "Let's keep going," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We're not done yet." The path ahead was unclear, but Elon knew that each trial would bring them closer to the truth. The tests were only going to get harder, and the stakes were higher than ever. Mars was hiding something profound, and they were on the cusp of discovering it. But as they moved forward, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't the only ones who were watching. The Guardian was more than just a force, it was a test. A trial of not just intellect, but of courage and sacrifice. And each step they took brought them closer to something much larger than they had ever imagined. They had come for answers, but now they were beginning to understand that the journey itself, every challenge, every trial, was part of a much greater story. The question was no longer whether they could survive the trials. It was whether they were ready to face the truth. The room trembled beneath their feet as the stone door closed behind them. Elon's breath quickened, the pressure in his chest building as the light in the cavern dimmed to an unsettling low. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, the hum of the Guardian's energy still reverberating in their helmets. The first trial had been a mental test, a puzzle to prove their intellect. But the words that followed haunted Elon's mind, ringing louder than the ever-present hum of the room. Intellect. "The first trial is complete," the voice of the Guardian had declared. "But there are more challenges ahead." Now, the next challenge was already taking shape before them. The walls of the cavern shifted once more, rearranging with an eerie fluidity, as though the room itself was alive. A door materialized in the stone wall ahead of them, this time smaller, unmarked by any symbols, but still glowing faintly with a dim, greenish light. The temperature in the room plummeted even further, a cold so sharp it cut through their suits and chilled their bones. "This is it," Jace muttered, his eyes narrowed. "The second trial. What do we have to do now?" Elon's gaze was fixed on the door ahead of them, his mind racing with the possibilities. The first trial had tested their intellect, but this one would test something far more personal. It wasn't about figuring out a puzzle or decoding ancient symbols. It was about facing their deepest fears, confronting the things they had spent their entire lives avoiding. The voice of the Guardian echoed through the room once again, cutting through the oppressive silence. "Courage," it intoned, its tone dark and commanding. "You have proven your minds are sharp, but now you must prove your hearts are strong. To pass this trial, each of you must confront your greatest fear. Only then will you be allowed to proceed." The words hung heavy in the air, and a deep, chilling dread settled over the crew. The trial wasn't about logic, it was about raw, primal emotion. Elon had seen many things in his life, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of this moment. The fear that had always lingered at the edges of his mind, the shadow that he had learned to push away, was suddenly looming large in front of him. Maya stepped forward first, her face resolute but pale. "We don't have a choice," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. "We either face this, or we fail. We're in this together." The door in front of them shimmered, and with a low groan, it swung open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage beyond. The walls inside seemed to close in on them as they stepped forward, one by one, into the unknown. The passage twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the heart of the structure. As they ventured forward, the temperature grew colder still, and a sense of unease settled over them, like the weight of the world was pressing down on their shoulders. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the air seemed to grow thicker, as if something was watching them. Then, the passage split into 3 distinct paths, each one darker and more forbidding than the last. The walls were adorned with faded carvings that seemed to shift and change as the crew's eyes moved over them. The paths ahead were shrouded in shadows, and the air seemed to vibrate with a tension that had nothing to do with the physical environment. This wasn't just a maze, it was a psychological battlefield, designed to break them down, to test the very core of their being. "This is where it gets real," Elon muttered under his breath, swallowing hard. His heart was racing in his chest, and his mind was racing faster. He could already feel the familiar grip of anxiety tightening around his throat. The fear of failure. The fear of making the wrong choice. The fear of what this journey might cost him. Maya's voice broke through his thoughts. We each take a path. We have to face whatever it is that's waiting for us. Elon turned to face her, seeing the same apprehension mirrored in her eyes. Are you sure? He asked, his voice low. We don't know what's down those paths. We'll face it together, she replied, her voice full of determination. But we each have to confront our own fear. It's the only way to pass the trial. One by one, they split off, each choosing a different path. Elon stood in front of the middle path, feeling a wave of cold wash over him as he stepped into the darkness. The air was thick and oppressive, and the walls felt like they were closing in around him. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning as if leading him deeper into his own mind. Suddenly, the passage narrowed further, and Elon had to duck to avoid the jagged rock above. The space felt suffocating, the air growing denser with every step. He could hear his breath quickening in his helmet, his pulse racing in his ears. The dread, the panic, was building. And then, out of nowhere, the room before him opened up into a vast chamber. A figure stood in the center, draped in a dark cloak. Elon's stomach dropped, the familiar sense of dread flooding his senses. It was his father. The figure raised its head, and Elon's heart lurched in his chest. Elon, the voice rasped. You have failed. You were never good enough. Never strong enough. You'll never live up to your potential. The words stung like a slap across his face. He hadn't heard his father's voice in years, but the shame, the guilt, the inadequacy, those feelings had never truly left him. It had always been there, lurking in the back of his mind, reminding him of the expectations he could never quite meet. Of the constant pressure to be perfect, to be the best. Shut up, Elon whispered, his voice trembling. You don't know what you're talking about. But the figure took a step forward, its eyes gleaming with cold judgment. You will always be a failure, Elon. You will never succeed. You will always disappoint those around you. Elon's chest tightened as the weight of his father's words pressed down on him. The familiar doubt crept in, wrapping around him like a vice. But in the back of his mind, he heard another voice, his own voice. Not anymore. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. The fear was still there, clawing at him, but he refused to let it control him. He had spent too many years letting fear dictate his life. It was time to face it head-on. I am enough, Elon said, louder this time. I don't need your approval. I've already proven what I'm capable of. The figure faltered, its form flickering. With a final, defiant shout, Elon surged forward, breaking through the illusion. The figure collapsed, fading into the darkness. And just like that, the fear was gone. He had passed the trial of courage. Elon stepped back into the central chamber, breathing heavily, his heart still pounding in his chest. The walls around him began to shimmer, and the passageways ahead of him began to fade away. He was no longer in the grip of the fear that had held him captive for so long. He had faced it, and he had conquered it. Maya, Jace, and the others were waiting for him, their eyes filled with quiet understanding. They had all been through their own trials. They had all faced the darkness within themselves. The voice of the guardian rang out again, this time with a sense of approval. Courage. You have proven your hearts are strong. But there is one last trial to face. Only then will you be granted the knowledge of Mars. Elon took a deep breath and turned to face his crew. We're not done yet. One more to go. The final trial loomed ahead. The weight of the trials that had come before pressed heavily on Elon's mind, but as the crew stood together in the chamber, they knew that they had only one more test to face. The first two trials had tested their intellect and courage. Now, they would be tested in a far more profound way, a test that would push them to their limits, both physically and emotionally. The walls around them began to shift once again, this time in a slow, deliberate manner. The air seemed to grow heavier, thick with anticipation. The once familiar hum of the Guardian's presence was now silent, as though it, too, was waiting for them to take the next step. Elon could feel it in the pit of his stomach. This was different. This trial wasn't about outsmarting or conquering fear. It was about something far deeper. The voice of the Guardian echoed in the chamber, cutting through the stillness like a blade. Intellect. Courage. You have passed the first 2 trials, the voice intoned, its tone dark and almost foreboding. But now, you will face the final trial. This trial will test your willingness to sacrifice. Only by giving up what you hold most dear will you prove your worth to continue. Are you ready? A heavy silence hung in the air as the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Sacrifice. The word alone carried a weight of its own, a weight that pressed down on each of them like a mountain. They had all lost something in their lives, whether it was a dream, a loved one, or a part of themselves. But what would they have to give up now? What would the final trial ask of them? Elon felt his stomach churn. This was the hardest test of all. The voice of the Guardian spoke again, its tone softer now, but no less commanding. You must each decide what you are willing to give up to pass this trial, the voice said. It will not be easy. The choice will not be clear. But only through true sacrifice will you earn the right to claim the knowledge of Mars. The chamber shifted once again, and before them appeared a series of images, visions that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Each image was a glimpse of something deeply personal to each of them, something they had held dear, something that defined them. For Elon, the first image that appeared was of his family, his mother, his father, and his younger sister. It was a memory from his childhood, one of warmth and safety. The memory of his father, before everything had changed. Before Mars. Before he had become consumed with his mission. His father had always told him that he was destined for greatness, but now, looking back, Elon wondered if he had sacrificed his family, his humanity, in pursuit of something that may have never mattered. The next image was even more painful. It was of his mother, standing at the door of their old house, tears in her eyes. It was the last time he had seen her before he left for Mars, and the look of disappointment and hurt in her eyes had haunted him ever since. Had he abandoned her for the sake of his mission? Was the pursuit of knowledge worth the cost of everything he had left behind? Elon clenched his fists, trying to push the emotions away, but they came flooding back. The weight of the decision he had to make loomed larger than any puzzle, any fear he had faced. This is the final test, the Guardian's voice echoed through the chamber. You must choose. To continue, you must give up what you hold most dear. Will you sacrifice your past? Your family? Your very identity? Only then will you be worthy of the truth. Elon's heart hammered in his chest as he stood frozen in place. How could he choose between the mission and the people he loved? What was more important, the truth of Mars, or the relationships that had shaped his life? Was it possible to have both, or had he already lost everything he cared about? Maya was the first to step forward, her eyes wide as she looked at the visions before her. She was facing her own personal hell. The images that appeared were not of her family, but of the people she had lost, the colleagues and friends who had died on Mars, the lives that had been sacrificed for the success of the mission. Her breath caught in her throat as the images shifted. She saw herself, alone, standing on the surface of Mars, staring out at the barren landscape. In the vision, she was older, gaunt, and defeated. She had become a shadow of the person she had once been, consumed by the isolation and loss. To continue, you must sacrifice your connection to those you have lost, the voice of the Guardian declared. You must let go of the grief, the pain, the anger that binds you. Only then can you truly move forward. Maya's hands trembled as she reached for the image of her lost friends, but before she could touch it, the image flickered and began to fade. She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. Then, with a deep breath, she turned away. "I will let them go," Maya said quietly, her voice filled with resolve. "I can't carry their ghosts with me anymore. I have to move forward, for all of us." The image of her lost friends disappeared, and the room brightened. The weight of her decision seemed to lift from her shoulders, but the emotional cost was still heavy. She had sacrificed part of her own heart, but in doing so, she had proven that she was ready for the next step. Jace stepped forward next, his face grim but determined. The images before him were different, his family, his friends, his life back on Earth. But there was one image that stood out among them all. It was of a young boy, no older than 5, standing at the edge of a cliff, smiling up at Jace with unguarded innocence. The boy was Jace's son, the child he had left behind when he chose to become part of the Mars mission. Jace had not seen his son in years. His decision to leave Earth, to work on Mars, had cost him the chance to be a father. And now, here, in this moment, the question had to be asked, could he continue this mission, knowing that his son was growing up without him? The voice of the Guardian rang out again. "You must give up what you love most. Your family, your future. Will you forsake the life you once knew to gain the knowledge you seek?" Jace's hand hovered over the image of his son. For a moment, he could feel the weight of the decision, every moment he had lost with his son, every birthday, every milestone. The guilt that had eaten at him for years threatened to overwhelm him again. But then, he let go. "I have to let him go," Jace whispered, a tear slipping down his face. "For the greater good. For the future of humanity." The image of his son faded, and the room brightened once again. Jace's breath came in heavy gasps, his face pale and worn with the cost of his decision. But there was a quiet peace in his eyes now, a sense of acceptance. Finally, Elon stood alone in front of the vision of his family. His hand trembled as he reached toward the image of his mother, his father, and his sister. The pain of their loss, the weight of their disappointment, threatened to drown him. But he knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, Elon stepped forward and let the image of his family slip from his grasp. He turned away, his heart breaking, but his resolve firm. "I choose the future," he said, his voice breaking but steady. "For all of us." The vision of his family vanished, and the chamber fell silent. The Guardian's voice echoed once more, filled with approval. "Sacrifice. You have proven that you are willing to give up all that you hold dear. You are worthy of the knowledge of Mars." The walls around them shifted, and a bright light filled the chamber. The final trial had been completed. Elon, Maya, and Jace stood together, their hearts heavy with the sacrifices they had made. They had given up pieces of themselves, but in doing so, they had proven their worth. The truth of Mars awaited them, but they now understood something far more profound. The journey was never just about the destination, it was about the choices they made along the way. The knowledge of Mars was within their grasp, but the true cost of their journey had just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The final trial was over. Elon, Maya, and Jace stood together, the chamber quiet and still, each of them weighed down by the sacrifices they had made. Yet, there was no time to rest, no time to reflect. The truth of Mars, the very knowledge they had come to seek, was now within their grasp. But what would it be? What secrets lay buried beneath the red dust of the planet? The walls of the chamber began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first, as if the very structure was alive. The light dimmed, casting long shadows across the floor. And then, before them, a door appeared, a massive, imposing structure, unlike anything they had seen before. It was made of a material that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light, a smooth surface that defied their understanding of technology. It was both ancient and advanced, as if it had been created by a civilization far beyond their own. "This is it," Elon whispered, his voice tinged with awe and uncertainty. The weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. They had come so far, past the trials, faced their deepest fears, and made unimaginable sacrifices. And now, they stood on the threshold of knowledge, knowledge that could change everything. The voice of the Guardian echoed once again, its tone calm yet filled with a sense of finality. "You have proven yourselves worthy. The knowledge of Mars is yours to claim." Elon stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward the door. The moment his fingers brushed against the surface, a surge of energy pulsed through the room. It was as if the very fabric of the planet itself had responded to their presence. The door began to slide open, revealing a chamber that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and ancient stone, but there was something else, something palpable in the atmosphere, a sense of anticipation. As the door fully opened, the room beyond was revealed in all its glory. It was vast, far larger than any structure Elon had ever seen. At the center of the room stood a massive, intricately carved pedestal. Resting atop it was a crystalline object, glowing with an eerie blue light. It seemed to pulse with an energy that hummed beneath the surface, as if it were alive. Elon's heart raced as he stepped into the room, his crew following close behind. The air felt charged, thick with power. They approached the pedestal cautiously, as if afraid that the slightest movement might trigger some sort of reaction. "This is it," Maya breathed, her voice barely audible. "This is what we've been looking for." Elon reached out to touch the crystal, but before his fingers made contact, a voice, different from the Guardians, spoke in a language they didn't understand. The words were alien, but the meaning was clear: "You are not alone." The crystal pulsed once again, and the room seemed to come alive. The walls shimmered, revealing intricate symbols that glowed faintly. They were etched into the stone, the same symbols they had seen in the trials, but now they were more than just ancient markings, they were a language, a map, a key. And then it hit him. The realization, like a bolt of lightning. This was a message. A message from an ancient civilization. A civilization that had been here long before humanity ever set foot on Mars. Elon took a step back, his mind racing. The implications were staggering. If this was a message from an ancient alien race, it meant that everything they had believed about Mars, their theories, their assumptions, their understanding of the planet, was wrong. Mars had never been lifeless. It had never been empty. There had been life here, and it had been far more advanced than they had ever imagined. But there was something else. Something deeper. The crystal wasn't just a record of a civilization. It was a warning. The voice echoed again, this time clearer, more insistent. They were here long ago. They left because of what they found. Do not repeat their mistakes. Elon's pulse quickened. He stepped closer to the pedestal, trying to comprehend what he was seeing, what he was hearing. What happened to them?" he asked, his voice shaking with the weight of the moment. The crystal pulsed again, and the walls around them flickered, revealing images of a distant past. Cities that rose from the surface of Mars, glowing with advanced technology. People, beings, humanoid in form, but with features unlike anything Elon had ever seen. They moved with purpose, building and expanding, their society thriving. But then, the images shifted. A catastrophe. A massive storm, unlike any natural disaster on Earth. The skies of Mars turned red, and the cities crumbled, their once pristine technology reduced to rubble. The people, those who survived, fled, leaving behind nothing but ruins. Elon's breath caught in his throat as he watched the devastation unfold. This wasn't just a story of a forgotten race. This was a warning, a record of the consequences of something far darker than they could have imagined. A catastrophic event that had nearly destroyed everything. Maya took a step forward, her voice trembling. What did they find? What did they discover that caused all this? The voice from the crystal answered, its tone heavy with sorrow. They uncovered the true nature of the planet. The power beneath the surface. A force greater than anything they could control. And they paid the price for it. The crystal pulsed one final time, its light fading into the stone beneath them. The room fell silent, and the walls reverted to their original, lifeless form. The chamber was still, the images and symbols disappearing as if they had never been there at all. Elon stood frozen, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. The implications were enormous. Mars was not the barren wasteland they had believed it to be. It was a place of great power, a place where something dangerous, lay beneath the surface. And if they weren't careful, they could repeat the same mistakes that had led to the downfall of the ancient civilization. The truth of Mars was not what they had expected. It was more than just a discovery of life. It was a revelation of power, of a force far beyond their understanding. And the more Elon thought about it, the more he realized that their mission had only just begun. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and filled with a new sense of urgency. "We've uncovered the truth, but now we have to understand it. We have to find out what this power is, and what it means for humanity." Maya nodded, her expression grave. "We've come this far. But now, we have to be careful. We can't let history repeat itself." Jay stepped forward, his face set with determination. "We're in this together. We'll face whatever comes next. For Mars. For Earth." The three of them stood together in the silence of the chamber, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. The knowledge of Mars had been unlocked, but the true challenge lay ahead. They had only just begun to understand what they had uncovered, and the path forward was uncertain, fraught with dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing was clear, whatever lay beneath the surface of Mars, it was not something they could ignore. The future of humanity depended on their next steps. The truth of Mars had been revealed. Yet, instead of providing the closure they had longed for, the secrets they had uncovered only opened the door to a far greater, more terrifying mystery. The air around Elon, Maya, and Jace felt charged with an electric tension. They could sense that something was stirring beneath the surface, something that they could neither control nor fully understand. The discovery had triggered something that had been dormant for millennia. As they stood in the chamber, the weight of their newfound knowledge pressed down on them like a heavy storm cloud, threatening to break. The room was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the crystal at the center of the pedestal. It was no longer glowing with its eerie blue light, but its presence was undeniable. It had shared its message, but now they were left with nothing but questions. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he turned to face the others. "We need to get out of here. We can't stay in this chamber any longer. It's not safe." Maya's eyes were wide, her face pale. "But, what do we do now? We've learned what Mars really is. We know what happened to the civilization that came before us. But what does it mean for us? For Earth?" Jace ran a hand through his hair, his face drawn with concern. "We don't know. We have no idea what we've truly uncovered. But I have a bad feeling about this. The way the crystal pulsed. I can't shake the feeling that we've awakened something." The unease in his voice was palpable. They had all felt it, the strange energy, the hum of power deep in the ground. The silence that had settled over the chamber now felt more oppressive than ever, as if something unseen was waiting, watching. "We need to get to the surface," Elon said, his voice firm. "We need to regroup and figure out our next steps. We've learned the truth about Mars, but the real question now is how to protect Earth. Whatever force is beneath this planet, it's dangerous. And we need to understand it before it's too late." With that, the trio turned and made their way toward the exit. But as they passed through the threshold, the ground beneath them shook. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, a faint tremor that they might have mistaken for a malfunction in their equipment. But then it intensified, the walls of the chamber trembling as though Mars itself was awakening from a long, dormant sleep. "Did you feel that?" Maya asked, her voice laced with anxiety. "Yeah," Jace responded, his eyes narrowing. "Something's happening. It's not normal. Something's coming." Before they could react, the ground beneath them cracked open with a deafening roar. The chamber shuddered violently, and the once stable walls began to crumble. Dust and debris filled the air as the team scrambled to maintain their balance. The crystal at the center of the pedestal glowed brighter, pulsing erratically, as though responding to the chaos around it. Elon's mind raced. He had seen enough in his life to know that nothing about this situation was natural. The ancient civilization had warned them about the force beneath Mars. They had thought the danger was long gone, sealed away with the ruins of the past. But now, it seemed that the force was stirring again. And they had unwittingly triggered it. "Get to the exit!" Elon shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team sprinted toward the door, their hearts pounding in their chests. The ground shook violently beneath them as massive cracks spread through the floor, creating deep chasms that seemed to swallow everything in their path. The walls buckled, groaning under the pressure as the entire chamber seemed to collapse in on itself. They ran faster, adrenaline coursing through their veins as the air grew thick with dust and the sound of destruction filled their ears. Just as they reached the door, the floor beneath them gave way. The ground split open, and Elon's heart skipped a beat. They were running out of time. They had to escape, or they would be trapped in the ruins of a planet that had once harbored secrets that now sought to destroy them. With one final burst of energy, the team leapt through the door, just as the chamber behind them collapsed into the abyss. The door slammed shut, cutting off the violent rumbling and the dust that had filled the air. They collapsed against the walls of the corridor, gasping for breath, their bodies shaking from the sheer intensity of what they had just experienced. The sound of the collapse still echoed in their ears, a constant reminder that they had barely escaped with their lives. "That was too close," Jace said, his voice hoarse with fear. "What the hell just happened?" Elon's face was grim, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and dread. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not over. We've awoken something, and now it's coming for us." Maya's eyes were wide with terror. "What did we release? What kind of power could do this?" Elon ran a hand through his hair, his mind struggling to piece together the puzzle. The ancient civilization had left the warning, they uncovered the true nature of the planet. The power beneath the surface. A force greater than anything they could control. And they paid the price for it. The force beneath the surface, was it the same power that had destroyed the ancient civilization? Had they triggered something far more dangerous than they had realized? "We need to get back to the surface," Elon said, his voice urgent. "We have to warn the rest of the crew. We need to figure out what's happening, and fast." The trio made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the underground facility, the tremors of the planet's awakening still shaking the ground beneath their feet. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew thicker, the temperature colder, and the sense of being watched intensified with every step. "Elon, look!" Maya exclaimed, pointing to a series of glowing symbols etched into the walls of the corridor. They were the same symbols they had seen in the chamber, the ones they had believed to be part of the ancient message. But now, the symbols were flickering. They were changing. "It's reacting to us," Elon said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's like the entire facility is alive, responding to what we've unleashed." As they approached the surface, the tremors intensified. The sound of shifting rock echoed through the tunnels, and the ground seemed to crack even further beneath their feet. It was no longer just a matter of escaping the collapsing chamber, they were in the midst of something far larger, something that could bring down everything they had worked for. Finally, they reached the surface, where the rest of the crew awaited them. The sky above them was dark with clouds, swirling in ominous patterns. Mars was changing, and they had no idea how to stop it. "We've made a terrible mistake," Elon said, his voice heavy with regret. "We've awoken something beneath this planet. And now, it's only a matter of time before it comes for us." The ground trembled once more, a violent reminder that their mission was far from over. The surface of Mars, once a place of quiet desolation, had now become a battleground. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sky, a sickly shade of red, churned with ominous, swirling clouds. Elon, Maya, and Jace stood at the edge of the facility, their breath shallow and quick, eyes scanning the horizon. The tremors that had started in the underground chamber now seemed to pulse across the entire planet. "Something's happening," Maya whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "We're not just dealing with a planet that's shaking from some seismic event. This is something unnatural." Jace's hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "Whatever we unleashed down there, it's not just a power. It's alive. And it's angry." Elon, still catching his breath from the narrow escape, stared into the distance. The landscape before them was no longer the quiet, barren Mars they had come to study. The ground was cracking open, fissures spreading like veins through the red soil, emitting plumes of toxic gas. It was as though the planet itself was protesting, fighting back against their intrusion. "We need to find shelter," Elon said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to get to the base camp, figure out what's happening, and warn the others." But even as he spoke, he knew that escape wasn't going to be that simple. Whatever had been unleashed beneath the surface had set a chain of events in motion that none of them fully understood. And worse, it wasn't just a matter of surviving Mars, it was a matter of surviving whatever force now roamed freely beneath its surface. They moved quickly, their boots crunching over the rocky terrain as they made their way toward the base camp. Every step was met with the unsettling sense that something was watching them, a presence that seemed to permeate the very air. The wind howled, carrying with it an eerie sound that sent chills down their spines. The once dead planet was now alive in ways they couldn't comprehend. As they approached the base camp, the situation only grew worse. The buildings, which had once been pristine and secure, were now shaking violently. The equipment, once neatly organized and functional, was being torn apart by the planet's sudden and unexplained rage. It was clear that the storm they were witnessing was no natural phenomenon, it was something far more powerful and far more malevolent. "We're not going to make it through this unless we can find out what we unleashed," Elon said, his voice strained with frustration. "We need to understand what this force is and how to stop it." "Stop it?" Maya's voice was full of disbelief. "How do you stop something that's this powerful? We barely escaped with our lives down there. We don't even know what we're up against." Elon's mind raced as he tried to piece together what they had learned from the ancient crystal. The warning was clear, they uncovered the true nature of the planet. The power beneath the surface. A force greater than anything they could control. And they paid the price for it. But what exactly was that force? Was it a weapon? A living entity? And if so, how could they hope to survive it? As they reached the base camp, they found the rest of the crew gathered near the command center, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. The radio equipment was buzzing with static, but no clear signal was coming through. The storm outside was interfering with their communication systems, cutting off any chance of reaching Earth. Elon, one of the crew members, Sarah, shouted as they approached. "What's going on?" "The tremors, the storms, it's like Mars is alive." "Are we under attack?" Elon shook his head. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not a natural disaster. We've unleashed something. Something that's been lying dormant for centuries." The crew stared at him, wide-eyed. "What do you mean? What could possibly be down there that could cause all of this?" Maya stepped forward, her voice low. "We found a crystal, an ancient artifact. It was left behind by a long-lost civilization, and it warned us about a force beneath the surface of Mars. A force they couldn't control." Jace nodded grimly. "And now it's awake. Whatever it is, it's responding to us. And it's coming for us. The air around them seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, as if the very weight of the planet itself was pressing down upon them. Elon's eyes darted around, looking for anything that might offer an explanation, a clue. The ancient civilization had left behind a message, but it was incomplete. The true nature of the power, the force that had destroyed them, was still a mystery. "We need to find out where it's coming from," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We need to track it down. If we can find the source of the power, maybe we can figure out how to stop it before it's too late." Jace spoke up. "But we don't even know where to begin. We don't know what this force is, where it's coming from, or how to even begin containing it. We're just guessing." Elon met his gaze, his face hardening with determination. "We start with what we know. The crystal told us the force is beneath the surface. It's buried deep. We need to find the entrance to whatever ancient structure the civilization left behind. It's the only lead we have." Maya glanced nervously at the storm raging outside, her thoughts clearly running in parallel with Elon's. "And if we can't find it? What if we're too late?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Elon didn't know what would happen if they failed, but he could feel the weight of the planet's impending destruction. The tremors were intensifying, the storm outside growing fiercer with each passing moment. "Then we'll fight," he said, his voice filled with grim resolve. "We'll fight for survival, for Earth, and for the future. Because if we don't, there won't be a future." With that, the crew made their preparations, loading up with equipment and supplies. Elon knew that the path ahead would be treacherous, and the dangers they faced were unlike anything they had encountered before. But the only way to stop the cataclysm now unfolding on Mars was to find the source of the power beneath the planet's surface. And so, with no time to lose, they set off into the heart of the storm. The winds howled around them as they made their way toward the last known coordinates of the ancient structure, their resolve stealing with each step. They didn't know what they would find, but one thing was certain: the battle for Mars had just begun. The storm on Mars was nothing like anything the crew had ever experienced. The wind howled with an unearthly shriek, swirling red dust in the air like a cloud of destruction. The sky, once a quiet red, now pulsed with unnatural energy, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The ground trembled beneath their feet as if it was alive, responding to their every movement. Elon, Maya, Jace, and the rest of the crew were now plunged into the heart of the storm, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. They had no choice but to press forward. The storm made it nearly impossible to see, and the tremors shook the ground beneath them in a way that felt like the planet was about to tear itself apart. But they had to find the ancient structure, the source of the power they had unknowingly awakened. If they didn't, Mars might collapse in on itself, taking them and Earth with it. "We need to stay together," Elon said, his voice barely audible over the wind's ferocious roar. "Stay close, and don't let the storm get the better of you." Maya nodded grimly. "It's hard to tell where we're even going. The storm's disorienting, and I can't get a clear read on our location." "I can barely see anything," Jace added, his voice full of frustration. "How are we supposed to track down the source of the power if we can't even see through this mess?" "We don't have time to waste," Elon said, his eyes scanning the swirling storm. He looked at the equipment strapped to his back, a mix of high-tech navigation tools and ancient data they'd recovered from the ruins. "We have the coordinates. We just need to trust the data. If the storm's affecting our readings, we'll have to rely on instinct and keep moving forward." The ground beneath them quaked again, stronger this time. The earth shifted and cracked open, creating deep fissures in the ground. Dust swirled up from the cracks, creating an almost impenetrable fog. The tremors were growing more intense, and Elon could feel the pressure building in his chest. It was as if the entire planet was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Elon, look!" Maya shouted, pointing ahead. Through the haze of dust and wind, a faint shape emerged in the distance, a towering structure rising out of the red desert like a jagged scar in the landscape. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, glowing faintly in the storm's light. It looked almost like a giant temple, but it was unlike anything the team had ever seen. The energy emanating from the structure was undeniable, an oppressive weight that seemed to saturate the air. "It's real," Jace muttered, awe and fear mixing in his voice. "It's actually real." Elon's heart raced. This was what they had been searching for, the source of the power. The ancient civilization had built this structure for a reason, and it wasn't to mark a place of worship. This was something far more significant, far more dangerous. "We need to get inside," Elon ordered. "Now." The team pushed forward, fighting against the storm's ferocity as they made their way toward the structure. Every step was a struggle. The wind pushed against them with unnatural force, and the tremors made it nearly impossible to keep their footing. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their only chance to stop whatever force had been awakened beneath Mars. As they reached the entrance of the structure, they found themselves standing before a massive stone door, covered in the same glowing symbols they had seen inside the ruins. The air was thick with energy, as though the door itself was alive, pulsing with power. "This is it," Elon said, his voice a mix of awe and trepidation. "This is where it all began." Maya's hand trembled as she reached for the door's surface. "How do we open it?" Elon stepped forward, studying the symbols. He recognized the pattern from their previous encounters with the ancient crystal. It was a sequence, a code of some kind. He traced his fingers along the carvings, feeling a subtle vibration beneath his touch. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed down on a specific spot. The door rumbled. Slowly, hesitantly, it began to slide open, revealing a dark interior. A faint blue glow emanated from within, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The temperature dropped as they stepped inside, the air thick with the smell of ancient dust and decay. "We're not alone," Jace said quietly, his voice tense. "I can feel it." Elon nodded, his instincts screaming that they were walking into something far beyond their understanding. The atmosphere in the structure was unlike anything they had encountered before, charged, alive, and full of the same dark energy they had felt in the ruins. The interior was a vast chamber, its walls lined with intricate carvings and ancient technology that hummed with an unsettling power. At the center of the room stood a massive, crystalline structure, its surface shimmering with a blue light that pulsed rhythmically. It looked almost like the crystal they had found earlier, but this one was far larger, far more powerful. "This is it," Elon said, his voice low with a mixture of awe and fear. "This is the source of the power. This is what the civilization left behind." Maya stepped forward, her eyes wide as she gazed at the crystal. "What is it? What does it do?" Elon hesitated, trying to comprehend the magnitude of their discovery. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not something we can control. It's not something any civilization should have ever touched." As he spoke, the crystal began to glow brighter, its pulse quickening, resonating with a deep hum that vibrated through the very ground beneath their feet. The air thickened, the temperature dropping even further as the power of the crystal surged to life. "We need to destroy it," Maya said urgently. "Whatever this thing is, it's dangerous. It's the source of everything that's happening to Mars." But Elon shook his head. "We can't destroy it. Not yet. We need to understand it. If we can figure out how it works, maybe we can shut it down, stop whatever this force is from consuming the planet." Before they could act, the ground beneath them began to shake violently. The hum of the crystal intensified, vibrating through the walls of the chamber as though it was calling to something deep within the planet. The storm outside raged with renewed fury, the wind howling like a living thing. Something was stirring beneath Mars, something ancient, something powerful. "We need to leave. Now," Jace shouted, his voice filled with panic. "It's waking up. Whatever it is, it's waking up." Elon's heart pounded in his chest. They had uncovered the source of the power, but now they were faced with a terrifying reality: Mars was not just a dead planet. It was a sleeping giant, and they had just woken it up. "Get to the exit," Elon ordered. "We need to get out of here before it's too late." The team turned and raced toward the door, but as they did, the ground shook violently, and the chamber began to collapse around them. The storm outside intensified, and the very air seemed to crackle with energy. They had awoken something, and now, they would have to fight to survive. The team sprinted through the dark corridors, their boots echoing against the stone floor. The tremors had escalated to an almost unbearable level, each rumble sending fresh cracked spiderwebbing across the walls. Dust and debris rained down, and the very air seemed to hum with a growing, insistent power. The exit was only 100 meters away, but it felt as though the structure itself was fighting to keep them in its grip, as if the planet had become alive and was determined not to let them escape. "Move faster," Elon shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaotic clamor of the storm that had now surged into the chamber, swirling with dust and debris. The once clear path to the exit had become a maze of falling rocks and shaking ground, the very tunnels warping as the structure groaned under the strain of the energy awakening inside. Jace was the first to break through the door, collapsing to the Martian soil with a cough as the wind whipped his hair into his face. "It's too late," he gasped, looking back toward the crumbling structure. "It's happening. It's waking up, and we're right in the middle of it." Maya stumbled through the doorway, her breath shallow, eyes wide in disbelief as she glanced back. "We didn't stop it. We didn't even understand what it was." Her voice shook with a mixture of anger, fear, and regret. Elon was the last to emerge, his face set with a look of grim determination. He glanced around at the storm swirling violently around them, the crimson sky, and the raging winds. Mars was no longer a lifeless red planet. It had become a place of chaos, responding to the ancient force that had been disturbed. "We're not done," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less resolute. "We've just started uncovering the truth. And if we're going to stop this from destroying everything, we need to keep pushing forward. I don't care how powerful it is." Maya's eyes softened for a moment as she looked at him, but there was no time for comfort. The storm outside grew fiercer, and they knew they had little time before the entire base would be overrun by the intensity of the energy that now surged across the planet's surface. "This is no longer just about us," Elon continued, taking a deep breath. "It's about the future of Mars, of Earth. If we can't stop this now, it could spread. It could wipe out everything." The team nodded grimly, understanding the weight of Elon's words. They had come here searching for answers, not knowing that they would unleash an ancient force so powerful that it could destroy both planets. Now, they were the only ones who knew the truth, an ugly truth that could shake the foundation of human understanding. The tremors shook them again, and this time, the sky flashed with an eerie light, a signal that things were only going to get worse. Elon could feel the energy building in the ground beneath his feet, the pulsing rhythm of something ancient, something so alien that it seemed to defy all understanding. "Look!" Jace shouted, pointing toward the horizon. Through the swirling dust and red clouds, a massive formation appeared. The ground cracked open in front of them, and from within, glowing structures began to rise, tall, jagged, and alive with the same pulse of energy that had been emanating from the crystal deep inside the ancient ruin. Elon's mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "Those are its conduits," Elon muttered under his breath. "Those are the structures the civilization built to harness the power. They must have created this whole system as a way to contain it." But the storm was now pushing the team back, and their communication systems were being jammed. "What do we do now?" Maya yelled, her voice trembling as the storm intensified. "We have to find a way to shut it all down," Elon said, clenching his fists, feeling the pressure building in his chest. The civilization tried to lock this power away, but they didn't know what they were dealing with. "We need to reverse the process before it destroys Mars, and Earth." As they huddled together, trying to make sense of what they had seen. The ground beneath them cracked once more, this time with terrifying force. The planet was literally shaking itself apart. Then, they heard it. A voice, deep and ancient, reverberating from the very depths of Mars. It was a low hum at first, a vibration that rattled their bones, but then it began to form words. "You have awakened what should not be awakened." Elon's heart raced. It was as if the planet itself was speaking to them, warning them of the consequences of their actions. "We need to get to the main structure," Elon yelled. "That's where the power is focused. If we can get inside, we might be able to figure out how to shut it down." With no time to waste, the team sprinted toward the distant structures, glowing jagged monoliths rising out of the ground like spires of obsidian. As they approached, the air grew thick with a strange, suffocating energy. The ground hummed with a dark power that sent waves of fear through them. But there was no turning back now. If they didn't act soon, the storm would be the least of their problems. They reached the base of the monolith, and Elon immediately recognized the same intricate markings from the crystal they had discovered earlier. There was no mistaking it now. The ancient civilization had been trying to control a force far more powerful than anything they had understood. And now, it was all coming undone. "This is it," Maya whispered, her voice trembling with realization. "We're not just fighting for Mars. We're fighting for everything. If we fail here, the destruction won't stop with the planet." Elon's mind was racing, trying to connect the dots. If the power source was in these structures, then perhaps there was a way to reverse the process, if they could just find the mechanism that controlled it. But the deeper they went into the monolith, the more intense the energy became, and the more disorienting their surroundings felt. The ground shook again, stronger than before. The walls of the structure seemed to warp, the very air bending under the weight of the power contained within. As they moved deeper into the heart of the monolith, a sudden realization struck Elon. They're not just conduits, they're transmitters. This whole structure was designed to send the power outward, to amplify it. The storm outside, it's not random. It's a manifestation of the energy being released. And it's going to keep spreading until everything is consumed. Jace's eyes widened with horror. "You mean the storm is just the beginning?" Elon nodded, his stomach churning with dread. "If we don't stop it now, there won't be anything left. Not Mars. Not Earth. Not even the stars." The room around them began to tremble more violently as the power surged, but Elon's voice remained steady as he turned to face the team. "We can do this. We have no other choice. Let's find a way to shut it down." And so, they pressed on, deeper into the monolith, knowing that the fate of both planets rested in their hands. But the path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unknowns. The stakes had never been higher. The walls of the monolith trembled violently as Elon and his team pushed forward. The eerie hum of the ancient power grew louder, vibrating through the air around them like a living entity. Every step they took was accompanied by an unsettling shift in the atmosphere, the temperature dropping and rising unpredictably as if Mars itself were breathing. Elon's eyes darted around, scanning the symbols carved into the walls. The glow of the monolith's power pulsated with an almost hypnotic rhythm, and the air felt thick with a tangible pressure. It was as if the very fabric of space and time was bending around them. "We need to find the control room," Elon muttered under his breath, a sense of urgency creeping into his voice. "There has to be one. This structure was built to contain something this powerful, there must be a way to reverse the process. We just need to locate the source." Maya nodded, her expression hard with determination. "The symbols on the walls, they look like a form of ancient technology. I've been studying them, and I think they might be a map, maybe showing us the way to the core of this thing. Let's hope it's not leading us to a dead end," Jace added, his eyes scanning the endless corridors that stretched out in front of them. "We don't have much time." The tremors continued, stronger now, as if Mars itself was responding to their intrusion. Every so often, the ground would shift beneath their feet, forcing them to steady themselves. The wind outside howled louder, sending gusts of red dust swirling into the monolith's cavernous halls, though the storm had been held at bay for now. But they knew it was only temporary. "Stay focused," Elon commanded, keeping his gaze fixed on the path ahead. The farther they went into the monolith, the more oppressive the air became. The walls were now covered in strange, shifting patterns, and the ground seemed to glow with an unnatural light. The team moved cautiously, their senses heightened. Every step seemed to reverberate through the structure. Maya stopped suddenly, her eyes locked on a set of symbols near a doorway. She reached out and traced the symbols with her fingers. "This is it," she said, a thrill of discovery in her voice. "These markings, they align perfectly with the data we collected earlier. I think this leads to the power core." Without another word, Elon motioned for the team to follow. They moved quickly, knowing that time was running out. The storm outside raged with renewed fury, and the ground beneath their feet trembled once more, sending fresh cracks through the walls. But the team pressed forward. They reached the heart of the monolith. A massive chamber lay before them, larger than any room they had encountered. At the center stood a towering structure, shaped like a twisted, metallic tree, its branches reaching out in all directions. It hummed with power, and at its core was a swirling vortex of energy, a dense mass of light and dark, constantly shifting and pulsing like a living creature. "That's it," Elon said, his voice low and filled with awe. "That's the source of the power. It's not just a crystal, it's a living system, built to channel and amplify energy." Maya looked at Elon, her eyes wide with fear. "What happens if we can't shut it down? What if it's too late?" "We won't let it be too late," Elon replied, his voice steely with resolve. He stepped forward, approaching the core. "We can still stop it. We just need to understand how it works." Jace, following closely behind, studied the pulsating core. "It looks like the energy's feeding into those channels," he said, pointing to the energy conduits running along the walls. "If we cut off the flow, maybe we can destabilize the whole thing." "Can we?" Maya asked, raising an eyebrow. "We have to," Elon said, scanning the room for any access points. He approached a panel on the wall, the symbols glowing faintly. As he placed his hand against it, the panel shifted open with a soft hiss. Inside was a set of ancient controls, mechanisms that appeared to be built for regulating the power. Elon's fingers flew over the controls, trying to make sense of the symbols. The intricate patterns began to form into a sequence in his mind. He had seen these markings before, the same ones from the ruins, the same ones in the crystal. It was a fail-safe. If the power ever became too unstable, this system was designed to shut it down. But as he input the sequence, something unexpected happened. The energy in the chamber flared, the core vibrating violently as if it had been triggered. A shrill alarm blared through the monolith, and a crackling voice echoed from the walls. "You cannot stop what has been awakened. The cycle is inevitable. Mars will return to its true form." The words chilled Elon to his core. Whatever this power was, it was not just a force of energy, it was a catalyst for something greater. "Elon." Maya's voice snapped him back to reality. "What are you doing? It's not working." He glanced at the glowing interface, and his heart sank. The symbols had shifted. The sequence had been altered. Whatever had been controlling this system was now beyond their reach. "We need to leave, now," Elon shouted. The walls were groaning, the ceiling above them cracking as the energy surged to an uncontrollable level. The power core was reaching critical mass. But before they could make it to the exit, the ground shook again with catastrophic force. The monolith's walls began to crumble, and the vortex at the center of the room spun faster, drawing energy from all corners of the planet. The storm outside reached a deafening crescendo, whipping the red dust into a frenzy as if Mars itself were screaming. Elon's mind raced. There was only one option left, a dangerous gamble. If they couldn't shut the system down, they had to collapse it from within. They had to destroy the source. Jace. Maya. Elon shouted over the deafening noise. I need you to get out of here, now. I'll handle the core. No way, Jace said, grabbing his arm. We're in this together, Elon. We're not leaving you behind. Elon shook his head. This has to be done. There's no time left. If I don't do this, the energy will spread. You won't make it out of here alive. Maya took a step back, her face pale with fear. What do you mean, collapse it from within? What will that do to you? I'm not sure, Elon admitted, his voice thick with resolve. But it's the only chance we have. The walls began to crumble faster, and the energy in the core was now overwhelming. Elon looked at his team one last time, his heart heavy but resolute. Go. Get to the surface, he said, his voice strained. I'll make sure it ends here. Before either of them could protest, Elon rushed forward, stepping into the center of the energy vortex. The power surged around him, and he felt his body thrumming with its raw force. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. With a deep breath, Elon activated the final sequence. The core flared with a blinding light, and the very ground beneath them shattered as the monolith exploded into a violent cascade of energy. The storm outside intensified, the red sky split wide open with bolts of lightning. Mars was waking up, and its awakening would be felt for generations to come. The moment Elon initiated the sequence, the ground trembled violently beneath their feet, and an explosion of light engulfed the room, sending a shockwave through the very bones of the team. For a brief instant, everything went white. The sound of the energy roaring was deafening, drowning out all other noise, as if the monolith itself had become a living, breathing creature, pulsating with unrestrained power. Jace and Maya stood frozen in horror as the walls cracked open, spewing dust and debris into the air. The temperature in the chamber plummeted, and a cold, suffocating wind whipped around them. They couldn't see anything. The light from the energy core had rendered everything but the most basic shapes invisible. They could feel the vibrations of the planet under their feet as if Mars itself was coming alive. Elon. Maya screamed, her voice hoarse and desperate, but it was swallowed by the cacophony of the storm raging around them. Where is he? Where is he? Jace grabbed her arm, his face etched with disbelief. We can't stay here. The whole place is coming apart. We have to get out, Maya. But Maya couldn't move. Every instinct in her told her to run, to save herself, but she couldn't leave Elon behind. He had given everything to try and stop this, he had made the ultimate sacrifice, and she couldn't just let him go. Her eyes darted around the chaotic space, desperately searching for any sign of Elon. The monolith, which had once been an awe-inspiring structure, now resembled a crumbling, disintegrating relic. The walls were buckling, and a low, ominous hum seemed to emanate from deep within the heart of the ruins. But through the roar of the destruction, one thing became clear to her: they had been too late. Whatever Elon had done, whatever gamble he had taken, it hadn't been enough. Jace tugged at her arm again. Maya. We need to get out now. The walls groaned as another tremor shook the room, this one stronger than the rest, and the ground beneath them shifted violently. A part of the ceiling cracked open, sending a massive chunk of stone plummeting toward them. Maya and Jace dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the falling debris. Maya scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest, panic rising as she realized that the monolith was collapsing faster than they had anticipated. The storm outside was intensifying, and she could feel the energy, this raw, untamed power, growing stronger by the second. The very ground beneath them seemed to pulse with it. Maya, look! Jace pointed frantically toward the far side of the chamber. There, through the swirling dust and debris, a faint figure stood. It was Elon, though his appearance was drastically different. The power from the core had altered him. His body glowed with a strange, ethereal light, his form surrounded by a radiant aura that flickered and pulsed like the energy itself. He was alive, but something about him was changed. Elon! Maya shouted, running toward him, but Jace grabbed her arm before she could get any closer. You don't know what's happening to him, Maya. We need to get to safety. But Maya's heart refused to let her abandon Elon. She pulled free from Jace's grasp and sprinted toward the glowing figure. As she reached him, she felt an overwhelming surge of power emanating from him. The air around them crackled, and the ground beneath her feet hummed in sync with Elon's energy. Elon, she gasped, placing her hand on his arm. His eyes flickered toward her, but they were no longer the eyes of the man she had known. There was something distant in them, something alien. He looked at her, almost as if from afar, his voice deep and resonant, as though it was coming from somewhere beyond his own body. Maya, it's too late, he whispered, his voice trembling. I couldn't stop it. The power, it's beyond me now. It's too strong. Mars is awakening. The storm is only the beginning. Maya felt the weight of his words crash down on her. A flood of guilt and despair overwhelmed her. They had come to stop the power, to prevent the destruction of Mars, and yet they had failed. Elon had given everything, and it still wasn't enough. What do we do now? Maya whispered, her voice cracking. How do we stop this? But Elon just looked at her, his expression almost peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. There is no stopping it now. Mars is no longer the dead world it once was. It has awakened, and it will never return to what it was. The storm outside grew even fiercer, the sky flashing with blinding light as the energy continued to pulse with greater intensity. Maya could feel the very ground shaking beneath her feet, the force of it threatening to tear the planet apart. Elon, we can't give up. We have to keep fighting, Maya said, her voice filled with a fierce determination she hadn't realized she still had. But Elon shook his head slowly, his body beginning to fade into the light that surrounded him. You must go, Maya. You must leave Mars. No, she cried, her heart shattering at the thought of losing him for good. I can't leave you. We can still fix this. He smiled, though it was a sad, resigned smile. Sometimes, the only way to save a world is to let it change. Mars will be reborn. It's too late for us. But you have the power to make sure Earth doesn't follow the same path. You must go back. Warn them. Tell them the truth. The light around Elon began to intensify, and Maya knew that he was slipping away from her. This wasn't the same Elon who had come to Mars, the man full of hope and determination. This was something else, something that had been forever changed by the power of Mars. Jace appeared beside her, his eyes wide with terror as he took in the sight of Elon. Maya, we can't stay here any longer. We need to leave, now. Maya hesitated, her heart torn. But then she looked into Elon's eyes, and in them, she saw the truth. The battle for Mars was over, but their fight for Earth was just beginning. With a final, agonizing glance at the man she had come to love, she turned to Jace. Let's go, she said quietly, her voice full of finality. As they ran toward the exit, the energy from the core surged one last time, and the ground beneath them began to collapse. The very air screamed as the storm on Mars reached its peak, and the monolith, now nothing but a crumbling ruin, was swallowed by the planet's awakening. And in the distance, the storm was not just a storm. It was a signal. A warning. Mars was no longer the planet they had known. It was something else now, something more dangerous, more powerful than they could have ever anticipated. The path ahead was uncertain, but Maya knew one thing for sure, the truth had to be shared. The future of Earth depended on it. The shuttle's engines hummed quietly as it ascended into the Martian sky. Maya sat silently in the cockpit, her fingers gripping the armrests, her knuckles white with tension. Outside the viewports, Mars looked like a scarred, broken world, its once pristine surface now ravaged by the energy that had been released from the core of the monolith. The red planet was still alive with power, a pulsing reminder of what had transpired beneath its surface. Jace sat next to her, his face pale and exhausted. The trip back had been quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. He had tried to speak earlier, but the words didn't come. What was there to say after everything they had witnessed? After Elon's sacrifice? After the storm that had torn the monolith apart, revealing the raw energy of Mars, something that could not be undone? Maya's mind drifted back to those final moments. Elon's eyes, full of both sadness and peace, had burned into her memory. He had known that Mars was beyond saving. He had known that this was only the beginning, not just for Mars, but for Earth. Jace broke the silence, his voice rough. Do you think we can stop it? I mean, what happened to Mars? It wasn't just a natural disaster. It was something more. Something we can't even understand. Maya exhaled slowly, her thoughts clouded. I don't know. We're not even sure how it all started. The core, the monolith, Elon's transformation, there's so much we don't know. But one thing is clear, Jace, Mars isn't just a dying planet anymore. It's alive, in a way we never imagined. The shuttle shot through the atmosphere, breaking free of the red planet's grip and heading into the void of space. Earth came into view, a beautiful, familiar blue sphere, yet it felt so distant. The thought of returning felt heavy, like a weight that pressed down on her chest. Earth was about to face something no one could have predicted, and she and Jace were the only ones who knew the truth. We have to warn them, Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. We have to get to Earth and tell them what we've seen. What Elon found. They need to know that what happened on Mars, it's only the beginning. Jace nodded, his jaw set in determination. We can't keep this to ourselves. They need to prepare for whatever is coming next. As the shuttle sailed deeper into space, the vastness of the universe around them seemed to close in, reminding them of how small and fragile their existence was. They had come to Mars with a mission to explore, to learn. But in the end, they had uncovered a force that defied everything they knew. They had unlocked something ancient, something powerful enough to reshape the fate of an entire world, and perhaps even Earth itself. The return to Earth wasn't going to be a peaceful one. The world would be in turmoil when they arrived. There would be questions, disbelief, and fear. And yet, no matter how hard it would be to convince the world of what had happened, Maya knew they had no choice. The danger Mars had unleashed was real. They had to warn Earth before it was too late. Back on Earth, life continued as usual. People went about their routines, unaware of the threat that lay in the stars. Governments, scientists, and space agencies were still focused on the next big exploration, the next giant leap. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew what had transpired on Mars. The shuttle carrying Maya and Jace entered Earth's atmosphere, descending towards the designated landing site. Maya's heart raced, her thoughts spinning. What would she tell the world? How could she convey the magnitude of what had happened? How could she make them understand that the fate of Earth might already be sealed? They landed in a remote facility where military personnel, researchers, and high-ranking government officials were waiting. As soon as the shuttle doors opened, Maya and Jace were met by a team of scientists, some familiar faces, some not. Among them stood General Harold Miller, the lead military officer overseeing Mars operations. "Welcome back," General Miller said with a grim expression. "We've been tracking your mission closely. What's the status on Mars?" Maya and Jace exchanged a look. The time for secrets was over. "We need to talk," Maya said, her voice firm but heavy with the weight of what she was about to reveal. The group led them to a conference room, where a massive screen displayed the latest satellite images of Mars. The planet's surface appeared scarred, as if it had been ravaged by an unseen force. Dust storms swirled over the surface, and the once quiet landscape was now alive with something unnatural. Maya took a deep breath and began. What we found on Mars, what Elon uncovered, was not just a natural phenomenon. The monolith was part of a system designed to harness and amplify energy. But it wasn't just about power, it was a living system, an ancient force that Mars had been keeping dormant for eons. And now, it's awake. She paused, watching as the room filled with shock and confusion. General Miller's brows furrowed as he processed the information. "Are you telling me that Mars is alive?" he asked incredulously. "Yes," Jace said, speaking for the first time. The monolith was a catalyst. Elon tried to shut it down, but it was too late. Mars has begun its transformation. What we triggered, it's bigger than we realized. And it's spreading. We don't know if the same thing will happen to Earth, but we need to prepare. The room fell silent. The weight of Jace's words hung heavy in the air. No one spoke, but the fear in their eyes was palpable. They all understood the implications of what Maya and Jace were saying. Mars wasn't just a barren wasteland anymore, it was a force of nature, a ticking time bomb. And no one knew if the same thing could happen to Earth. "What do we do now?" General Miller asked, his voice low and steady. Maya looked at the screen again, the swirling storms over Mars a constant reminder of what had happened. What could she say? They didn't have all the answers, but they did know one thing: they had to act fast. "We need to get the best minds on this," she said. "We need to figure out how to stop it from spreading. We don't have much time." The future felt uncertain. The path ahead was filled with questions that no one had answers to. But one thing was clear: Mars had changed. And whatever had happened to Mars, Earth was now in danger of following the same path. As Maya and Jace left the room, they knew that their work was just beginning. The storm on Mars wasn't just a storm anymore. It was a sign of what was to come, a sign that would change the course of history for both planets. The world was in chaos. News outlets broadcasted the unsettling footage from Mars, showing the violent storm that had engulfed the planet's surface. The swirling clouds of red dust and power flashes illuminated the night, making Mars appear as if it were alive, fighting against something it had never experienced before. And then there was the ominous message that Maya and Jace had delivered: Mars had awoken, and Earth was now at risk. The United Nations convened in an emergency summit to address the situation. In major cities around the world, governments mobilized their forces, and scientists from every corner of the globe worked around the clock to analyze the phenomenon. But the one question that plagued everyone was, what was happening on Mars, and how could they prevent it from spreading to Earth? Maya and Jace were summoned to the UN headquarters in New York City. The weight of their responsibility was almost unbearable. They had seen the devastation Mars had gone through, and they knew it was just the beginning. The energy unleashed from the monolith, the one Elon had discovered, was like nothing Earth had ever encountered. Maya stood in front of the assembly room, facing rows of the world's most powerful leaders and top scientists. The faces staring back at her were a mix of fear, disbelief, and determination. She could feel the weight of their gazes, each one measuring her words, each one desperate for an answer that Maya didn't have. "There's no easy way to say this," she began, her voice steady but filled with the gravity of the situation. "What we encountered on Mars is a force beyond our comprehension. It's not just a planet undergoing a natural change. It's something else. Something that has been dormant for millennia and has now awoken." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "The monolith we discovered was a focal point for an ancient energy, one that Mars had kept contained for ages. But that energy is now active, and it's slowly transforming the planet. We tried to stop it, but we were too late." The room fell into stunned silence. "We don't know how this energy will affect Earth," Jace added, his voice echoing Maya's somber tone. "But we need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the more likely the same phenomenon could begin on Earth. It's already started spreading across Mars. We can see it in the storms, the rapid shifts in the planet's atmosphere, and the changes in its core. It's alive, and it's only a matter of time before it reaches us. A murmur of panic spread through the assembly room. The global leaders exchanged glances, some looking to their military advisors for direction. Others turned to the scientists, hoping they might have a solution. But there were no answers, only questions. "What can we do?" a voice rang out from the crowd. It was a delegate from China, his tone sharp with urgency. "We don't have much time," Maya said, trying to keep her composure. "We need to establish a task force immediately, scientists, engineers, military, and planetary experts. We need to understand how this energy operates, and how we can neutralize it before it spreads to Earth. But the truth is, we don't even know if we can stop it. Mars is transforming at a rate we've never anticipated. It's an unknown force we don't fully understand. Are we just supposed to sit here and wait for Earth to be consumed?" the delegate from France demanded. Maya felt the heat of his anger, and the truth of his words stung. "No, we're not waiting. But we need to prepare for the worst-case scenario. If Earth is vulnerable, we need to find ways to shield ourselves, to protect our planet from whatever force is transforming Mars." A scientist from the European Space Agency stood up, his voice trembling as he spoke. "What if the transformation on Mars is part of a larger, cosmic event? Something beyond our control? What if it's happening to other planets as well?" Maya turned to Jace, her expression darkening. She hadn't considered that possibility, but the scientist's words hung in the air like a chilling prophecy. The energy, the awakening of Mars, it might not just be isolated to their planet. If this was a force affecting the entire solar system, who knew what other worlds had already been changed? The general silence in the room was broken by the sound of a door opening. A tall, distinguished man stepped into the room, General Harold Miller. He was wearing his military uniform, his face set in a grim expression. "Director," Miller said, turning to the UN representative who had been overseeing the summit, "we have a situation." He handed a tablet to the UN leader, who quickly scanned the information before showing it to the assembly. The screen displayed a new, terrifying development. Satellite images of Earth, taken in real time, were beginning to show unusual atmospheric disturbances, strange storms, strange energy patterns, and a disruption in the magnetic field. "What are we looking at?" Maya asked, her heart skipping a beat. "We're seeing the same energy patterns that were detected on Mars," Miller said. "These anomalies are now showing up on Earth. They're not as severe, not yet, but they're growing. The pattern matches exactly what we saw on Mars before the transformation began. This is no longer just a Martian issue. The energy is beginning to spread." Maya's pulse quickened as she processed the information. "This is it. It's happening here too. It's already on Earth." There was a collective gasp in the room as the enormity of the situation sank in. "We need to act," Jace said, his voice rising with urgency. "The time for debating is over. We need to find a solution, now. We need to contain this energy before it consumes Earth, just like it did Mars." A different delegate, one from Russia, spoke up. "What are the chances of reversing this? Can we shut it down? Can we kill the energy before it spreads too far?" Maya shook her head. "We don't know. Mars was the test. Elon Musk, he tried everything. We've seen what happens when you tamper with it, when you try to contain it. It only grows stronger." "Then it's time to prepare," General Miller said, his voice firm. "We'll need to protect the planet. If we can't stop the energy, we need to contain it. The military will begin organizing defensive operations immediately. But we'll need the best scientists in the world on this, and we'll need every country working together." Maya nodded. "We have no choice. We need unity. Earth is in danger. But together, we might have a chance. The next few hours were a blur of meetings, strategizing, and briefings. Maya and Jace worked with the world's top experts, trying to piece together what had happened on Mars, and what could be done to stop the spread of the energy. The world's governments set aside their differences, realizing the grave threat they were facing. The fate of Earth rested in their hands. As Maya sat in a temporary command center, staring at the growing storms outside, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. They had gone to Mars seeking answers, hoping to uncover a mystery that would expand humanity's understanding of the universe. But instead, they had discovered something far more dangerous, something that threatened not just Mars, but the entire solar system. And now, Earth was on the brink. The energy that had consumed Mars was on its way here, and Maya could only hope that the world was ready for the fight ahead. The days that followed the emergency summit were a blur. Governments worldwide moved into high alert mode. Military forces, research teams, and space agencies coordinated efforts on an unprecedented scale. The energy that had awakened on Mars was now spreading to Earth at a worrying pace, and the situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Maya and Jace were pulled into a whirlwind of decisions, meetings, and briefings. They had become the face of the crisis, the ones who had seen it firsthand, and now they were tasked with guiding humanity through its darkest hour. But even they felt helpless in the face of such an overwhelming force. The anomaly that had been detected on Earth was no longer a series of small disturbances. Massive electrical storms, strange fluctuations in the atmosphere, and abnormal shifts in the magnetic field were now being reported across the globe. The energy from Mars was no longer contained, it was beginning to take root on Earth, affecting everything from weather patterns to human behavior. The streets of major cities buzzed with a new kind of tension, fear mingled with a desperate sense of urgency. The world's population seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a catastrophe that no one could predict, but everyone feared. No one knew exactly what would happen, only that the very fabric of life was changing. It felt as though the world was on the edge of some great precipice, with the abyss waiting just below. In an effort to combat the spreading energy, a new global defense initiative was formed. Military forces were put on standby, ready to respond to the unknown consequences of the energy's presence. The best scientists and engineers were assembled to create a defense system capable of containing the energy, if that was even possible. But despite the monumental resources being allocated, there was still no consensus on how to stop the energy from spiraling out of control. Maya and Jace were assigned to a top-secret project known as the SHIELD Initiative. The goal was to create an energy field, a protective barrier, that could prevent the energy from spreading further and shield the Earth from the full force of the anomalies. The technology was still in its infancy, and its chances of success were slim. But it was the only plan they had. "We're in uncharted territory," Jace said, staring at the holographic display in front of him, his eyes reflecting the urgency in the room. "We've seen what happened to Mars. If this energy reaches its full potential on Earth, it could be catastrophic. And even if we can stop the spread, it's unclear whether the damage done will be irreversible." Maya looked up from the display, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of energy that now spanned across Earth. The world seemed to be under siege, as if the planet itself was fighting back against something it couldn't control. "We don't have the luxury of time," she said, her voice hard and resolute. "We have to try. If this energy reaches full force, we may not be able to do anything to save ourselves. We need to stop it now." Weeks passed in a blur of long hours and sleepless nights. The team behind the SHIELD initiative worked tirelessly, making modifications to satellites, energy arrays, and the newly developed defense systems. Maya and Jace were heavily involved, each of them contributing their unique knowledge and experiences to the mission. But with every passing day, the strain was evident. The stress was beginning to take its toll on their minds and bodies. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and the knowledge that their every decision could mean the difference between life and death made sleep elusive. Finally, the day arrived when the SHIELD initiative was ready for its first test. The project had been pushed forward at an incredible pace, but there were still uncertainties: if the energy from Mars could be halted, if their technology could actually block it from further affecting Earth, if they could save humanity from the impending storm. The world held its collective breath as the launch sequence for the SHIELD began. The satellites that had been repositioned around the globe hummed to life, transmitting powerful energy beams in synchronized pulses, creating a barrier meant to encapsulate the planet. The goal was to create a field that could deflect the Martian energy, neutralize it before it could grow any stronger. Maya and Jace stood in the control room, watching the massive screens as the countdown to activation began. The air was thick with tension. There was no turning back now. As the countdown hit 0, a pulse of energy shot out from the satellites, spreading across the planet's atmosphere. For a moment, there was silence. The world held its breath. The first signs of success came in the form of a massive wave of energy that washed over the Earth, but instead of the chaos they had feared, the pulse was contained. The energy didn't spread. It bounced off the SHIELD, dissipating into the atmosphere harmlessly. For the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of hope. But then, a new problem emerged. The Martian energy, though repelled, began to react to the SHIELD in ways that no one could have predicted. It became more volatile, more concentrated. It surged toward specific points, seeking to breach the protective barrier, as though it was determined to break through, to find a way to reach its final goal. "It's adapting," Maya said, her voice trembling with the realization. "It's learning how to bypass the SHIELD." "What does that mean?" Jace asked, his tone strained. "It means we're not finished yet," Maya replied. "We need to tweak the system. We need to find a way to make the SHIELD more adaptable, to fight the energy in a way we can't predict." But as they worked to make adjustments, the energy continued to grow. The storms on Earth intensified, and the atmosphere began to tremble with strange, unnatural forces. Maya and Jace knew that they had only a narrow window of time before things spiraled out of control. In the final moments of the mission, as the storm grew fiercer, it became clear to Maya that the only way to ensure the SHIELD's success was a dangerous, untested move. The system required a direct input of energy from the monolith, the same energy that had awakened Mars. To stabilize the SHIELD, they would have to harness that energy and inject it into the system. The problem? The only way to access that energy was by returning to Mars. Elon Musk had discovered that the monolith was the key to unlocking its full power. And now, in order to save Earth, they had to risk everything once more. "We have to go back," Maya said, her eyes locked on Jace's. "I'm the only one who can do this. We need to harness the Martian energy directly to stabilize the SHIELD." "No," Jace protested, but Maya cut him off. "If I don't do this, Earth will fall. This is our only chance." And with that, Maya made the ultimate sacrifice. She launched herself back into space, this time toward Mars, knowing that her actions could either save humanity, or doom them all. Maya's mission to Mars was the final, pivotal moment in the battle for Earth's survival. As she made her way toward the monolith, the Martian storms raged around her, a reminder of the immense power they were fighting against. But in that moment, Maya understood what Elon had known: sometimes, saving a world required the ultimate sacrifice. And as she activated the energy system, the world watched, praying that the SHIELD would hold. Mars, in its mysterious, ancient way, had reached out to Earth, offering its final gift, the key to survival. The energy from Mars stabilized the SHIELD just in time, keeping the Martian force at bay, and Earth was saved. The battle had been won, but the question remained: what would the future hold for Earth, Mars, and the mysteries of the cosmos? Only time would tell. But for now, humanity had won a hard-fought victory, one that would echo throughout history. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?